Chapter 862. The tens of thousands of soldiers of Dingxi province were surrounded by more than 1,000,000 enemies. Although the enemy soldiers were slightly weaker than the soldiers of Dingxi province, a few of their generals had the cultivation base of the 6 stars realm of the second Panga heaven. These generals were shouting slogans as beast souls that looked like eagles wheeled and danced above their heads, carrying them into the sky and charging straight into the army of Dingxi province. Among the 1,000,000 soldiers, more than 10,000 oracles were casting spells at the back to help these soldiers with all kinds of auxiliary spells. In comparison, the Dingxi province's 30-odd priests could be considered shabby. Although Zhong province, a first-grade province, had hundreds of thousands of oracles, Dingxi province was only an 8th-grade province, and its directorate of celestials was too small. The power of magic made up for the gap in cultivation base. The army of 1,000,000 soldiers had surrounded the 10 flying ships of Dingxi province, and countless bolts were raining down on them. Clearly, the craftsmanship of these bolts was the same as that of Diyu, and they had made a great breakthrough in their ingenuity. However, the products of outer heavenly realms could not be compared with those of Panga continent, so the actual power of these bolts was less than 10% of Diyu's standard ordnance. The bolts bounced off the flying ships, and none of them made it into the ships. Instead, the decks on both sides of the ships were moved aside, revealing the firing ports of large, custom-made crossbows. Accompanied by loud rattling noises, wave after wave of bolts flew out. Wherever the dark bolts passed, the armors and defensive spells of the soldiers from outer heavenly realms were pierced, and their bodies were torn to pieces by the powerful bolts. Diyu. With a long knife in hand, the general of Dingxi province leaped out of the flying ships and lunged at the generals of the enemy. With a flicker of his body, one of the generals swung his scimitar lightly, and his head flew into the sky along with a jet of blood. The gap in absolute strength could not be made up for. On top of that, the generals of the enemy had fused with their beast souls and possessed the ability to fly at will, and their agility in the air was not something the general of Dingxi province could compare with. In the void, a supreme oracle cursed angrily. The supreme tower shattered the void, and he appeared directly above the 2 armies that were fighting. He shouted sternly, "How dare you? How dare you attack this old man's descendant?" He raised his right hand high up into the sky, and countless dark clouds swooped over from all directions. The dark clouds transformed into hundreds of thousands of venomous black serpents that shot down from the sky. The poisonous pythons pierced through the air with a sharp sound, like countless arrows falling one after another. The cold and poisonous gas penetrated the internal organs, and a large number of enemy soldiers could only let out a miserable howl before they turned into pus and blood, falling down one after another. Wu Qi gave Yugu a look. Yugu said in a low voice, "He is the most senior patriarch of the Jilin clan." The Jilin clan does not have a strong background, and Dingxi province is the only vassal province of the Jilin clan. The boy who was killed just now is Jilin Feng's 9th-generation grandson, am I right? It turned out that a descendant of his clan had been killed. No wonder this supreme oracle named Jilin Feng couldn't wait to rush out. What surprised Wu Qi was that none of the primordial immortals and Buddhas hiding in the void made a move. Although Jilin Feng was a supreme oracle, he was the weakest one, only as strong as a 9th-tier primordial immortal. Any one of them could easily stop his massacre. A supreme oracle against 1,000,000 ordinary soldiers was a complete massacre, and it would only take the span of a few breaths for the army to be wiped out. Just when Jilin Feng's spell had killed a large number of enemies, and when the general of the enemy who had just killed his junior was badly mutilated, a 1,000-feet-tall flagpole was suddenly erected in the distance. A huge golden flag with a circumference of 100 feet was embossed with a gold-plated character, Meng. A clear voice that sounded like the roar of a dragon rang out, "This evildoer is too powerful. Which of you can share my burden?" 2 pitch-black 7-storied pagodas came piercing through the void, emanating a powerful energy wave that forced Jilin Feng to retreat a few miles back. On top of the pagodas stood 2 haggard old men, who looked no worse than those senior oracles of Diyu. Their loose black robes were fluttering noisily in the strong wind. With their hands clasped behind their backs, they stared at Jilin Feng with a cold grin on their faces. All the supreme oracles of Deyu hiding in the void were struck dumb. The aura emanating from these two old men was no different from that of the oracles who practiced various mystic arts in Deyu's Directorate of Celestials. However, the shape of their supreme pagodas was very strange. One could say that they were the demon-subduing pagodas of Tao League, or the pagodas of Buddhist League, but they were definitely not the supreme pagodas of Deyu. The 7-storied pagodas were pitch black, and each of them was engraved with countless carvings of ghosts and deities. In this aspect, it was very similar to the style of Deyu's Directorate of Celestials, but apart from that, there was nothing similar to the supreme pagodas of Deyu. At first glance, the 7-storied pagodas looked exactly like those commonly seen in Buddhist League or Tao League, except that their style was a little strange. What made them even more speechless was that the pagodas were deployed with formations of Tao League and restrictive spells of Buddhist League. The dark supreme pagodas were shrouded in wisps of immortal energy and wisps of Buddhist light, which made them look neither fish nor fowl. All the oracles of Deyu in the void were speechless. Yugu's expression flickered slightly, and Wuqi said in a deep voice, "Let's not rush into action for the time being. Let's just stand guard for Qilin." Yugu and the other oracles understood what Wuqi meant. Quietly, they changed their positions in the void and enveloped the vast battlefield. The primordial immortals of the Celestial Court and the Buddhas of Buddhist League who were hiding in the void remained motionless. Not only that, but Wuqi and the others also heard a few sneers coming from the void, as if mocking the supreme oracles of Deyu for being too petty. Wuqi stomped his foot in silence. Then, the Darkeen Celestial Tower, which stood 3 miles tall and several miles wide, opened its 4 doors in 4 directions. 8 jade-armor dark turtle flying ships flew out first, and then hundreds of large flying ships swam out silently like fishes. There were at least 2,000 soldiers on each ship. With Wuqi's attack, the army of the East Sea had also mobilized 1,000,000 soldiers. The army of the East Sea was equipped with the best armaments of Deyu. There were 8 jade-armor dark turtle flying ships with extremely strong defensive power, while the rest of the large flying ships were either very lethal or very fast, and they all had their own unique means of attack. Princess Xianglu gently waved her hand and tore a rift in the void. The army of the East Sea charged out in unison, surrounding the army of Great Meng from the periphery. With a cold laugh, Wuqi and Princess Xianglu flew out of the rift as well, standing beside Qilin Feng with a smile on their faces. Qilin Feng gave Wuqi and Princess Xianglu a grateful look, then gave the army of the East Sea a look of astonishment. Although the supreme oracles possessed profound magical power, and each of their supreme towers was a battle fortress that could accommodate 1,000,000 soldiers, there were only a few supreme oracles who could do so. However, there were not many supreme priests who actually did this. If an army of 1,000,000 people were to be packed into the Tower of Babel and brought everywhere, all kinds of troubles would be endless. But now, there was an army of 1,000,000 soldiers from the East Sea, all of whom had solemn faces and were shrouded in a murderous aura. Obviously, they were the best of the best. With that, the army of Great Meng was no match for them. The expressions of the 2 black-robed old men changed slightly. One of them cleared his throat, then cupped his fist at Wuqi and said, "Fellow Taoists, please." Wuqi and Princess Xianglu did not say a word. Qilin Feng stepped forward and said to the 2 old men with a cold smile, "You have killed my juniors. Hand over the culprit quickly, or else." The 2 old men looked at each other and laughed at the same time. They said in unison, "Otherwise what? Fellow Taoist, are you going to slaughter the people of Great Meng? We are all people of the human race. He, if you really do that, you will have a hard time dealing with the Huang clan." Qilin Feng's expression flickered. He snorted coldly, then waved his hand and unleashed a snake-shaped dark energy toward the 2 old men. In just a blink of an eye, it had transformed into a 9-headed black serpent, opening its mouth and biting down at the 2 old men. "I can't kill these ordinary people, but I can kill you," he cried out sternly. Wuqi narrowed his eyes and stared at the 2 old men. He opened his primordial Dharma eyes slightly, and saw through the circulation of magical power in the 2 old men's bodies, as well as the various incantation gestures and spells they were chanting. The two old men performed an incantation gesture at the same time, then stamped their right feet on the top of the pagoda. A loud rumble echoed out in the void as dozens of light beams wrapped around numerous meteors, each the size of a water tank, tumbled down from the sky. Over 30 meteors smashed onto the nine-headed black serpent's body, causing the black mist around it to churn violently. These meteors came from beyond the heavens, and they had been tempered by the power of the sun, moon, and stars day and night, which gave them a sharp aura that was not found in the mortal world. As the black serpent was only a manifestation of magical power, it was instantly smashed into pieces. The remaining meteors came straight at Qi Lin Feng. Qi Lin Feng snorted coldly. Countless specks of light lit up on the supreme tower beneath his feet, and streams of ghost fire spread out rapidly along the tower. Before long, the dark supreme tower was covered with countless ghost fires, forming a complicated rune formation. 3 layers of black light shields burst out in the sky, and the meteors smashed onto them and exploded into flames. The meteors disintegrated, but the light shields remained intact. After a brief exchange of blows, both sides had found out each other's actual strength. Qi Lin Feng's magical power was much more powerful than his opponent's, and his cultivation base was slightly stronger as well. However, the two old men were able to use meteors to attack. Although their magical power was slightly weaker, with the help of the power of heaven and earth, they were on par with Qi Lin Feng. Moreover, there were 2 of them, while Qi Lin Feng was alone. When the army of Great Meng, which had been besieging the army of Dingxi province in a messy manner, saw the army of East Sea, they began to slowly retreat. The East Sea army protected the soldiers of Dingxi province, standing dozens of miles away from the enemy. The cultivation base of the army of East Sea was several times stronger than that of the enemy, and their ordnance was much better. If a real fight broke out, it would only take a quarter of an hour for the enemy's army of 1,000,000 to be completely destroyed. Seeing that Wu Qi and Princess Zhangli had suppressed the army of Great Meng as soon as they showed up, the clear voice under the flag with the word Meng rang out again. The evildoer is too powerful. Can't you share my burden, my dear subjects? A series of long cries rang out as dozens of pitch-black 7-storied pagodas soared into the sky, flying straight toward Wu Qi. Wu Qi and Princess Zhangli were shocked, and they quickly ordered the army of East Sea to retreat. How could Great Meng, a kingdom from an outer heavenly realm, have dozens of experts who are as strong as supreme oracles? But, among the kingdoms from the outer heavenly realms brought by far heaven, there were at least 10 that were as strong as Great Meng. Not only Wu Qi, even Yu Gu and the others hiding in the void felt their hearts tremble. How long had the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League been planning all this? Chapter 863. The long sound of the dragonbone flute tore through the sky and split the earth. Accompanied by this shrill sound, more than a dozen flagpoles, each about 1,000 feet tall, were erected among the crowds of people walking out of the far heaven. Apart from the Meng flag, the other flags were either with 1, 2, 3, or 4 characters, all of which represented a dynasty or an empire. A dozen middle-aged men dressed in gorgeous robes and with the air of emperors on their faces were riding in splendid chariots, pulled by flood dragons. Above each chariot, there were at least a dozen, and as many as 107-storied supreme towers that looked almost identical, following closely behind. On top of each supreme tower stood an old man in a black robe. The ripples of energy emanating from them were as dazzling as the bright lights in the night. The combined strength of the dozen or so outer heavenly realms that had descended from far heaven was greater than the number of Dayu's supreme oracles hiding in the void, which made the hearts of everyone, including Wu Qi, sink. Quantitative change led to qualitative change. With such a large number of supreme oracles, let's just call them supreme oracles for the time being, there must be a few existences with amazing strength hiding among them. The auras of the primordial immortals of the Celestial Court and the Buddhas of the Buddhist League gradually faded into the distance, and as their ripples of energy faded away, countless sneers drifted down with the breeze. Yu Gu and the others emerged from the void, their faces gloomy. Their supreme towers had shattered the void and brought them to the battlefield. Hundreds of Dayu's supreme oracles were facing nearly 1,000 enemies from outer heavenly realms whose cultivation bases were on par with theirs. The faces of Dayu's oracles were solemn, but the people from outer heavenly realms were in high spirits, and without exception, their faces were full of pride. Even though Yugu and the others were stronger than these people, they still could not make them feel the slightest fear. Long cries of flood dragons rang out as 18 chariots came slowly to the center of the battlefield. A middle-aged man, about 10 feet tall and burly like a mountain, stood on one of the chariots, his eyes gleaming brightly as he cried out, "Why are you blocking our way? Is this not Panga continent? Isn't this the birthplace of the human race? Aren't we the descendants of the human race? Aren't we qualified to live and thrive on Panga continent?" The series of questions caught Yugu and the others off guard. Vague spiritual fluctuations spread through the air as they discussed how to answer the man's questions. After a long time, Yugu said with a little embarrassment, "You're right, Your Excellency, but..." The man snapped, "But so what? Don't tell me Panga continent belongs to all of you." The man's words were as sharp as knives. How could Yugu and the other old oracles, who had been cultivating in seclusion all year round, be his match? It was obvious that this man was one of the strongest among the 18 emperors. His questions were aggressive, but his words were reasonable. Yugu and the others could not think of any words to refute him. Panga continent was transformed from Saint Pangu's body, and the humankind was created by the combination of Saint Pangu's spirit blood and the bloodlines of hundreds of the most powerful divine creatures. Therefore, the humankind alone enjoyed the great fortune of Panga world, and was able to thrive on Panga continent. As these people were also descendants of the human race, they naturally had the right to settle down on Panga continent. Seeing Yugu and the other old oracles glancing awkwardly at each other, unable to answer the red-faced man's question, the 18 emperors and the oracles around them burst out laughing at the same time, and so did the army behind them. The red-faced man shook his head and sighed, "Everyone, please make way for us. We are just wanderers who have been away for too long. Now that we have returned to the place where our ancestors lived, we do not wish to start a fight on our first day home." Yugu and the others were in a dilemma. Make way for them? How could that be? If these people were refugees, it would have been a piece of cake for Dayu to accept them. But they were all organized. They had formed their own kingdoms, and they had returned to Panga continent with a large army and a formal oracle system. It would be ridiculous to think that they were the youngest sons who had returned to their ancestral land. Stop them here and fight with them? With the overall strength of these Dayu oracles, it was not impossible for them to kill all these people in front of them. But the enemy's oracles had an absolute advantage in numbers. Even if they were killed, they would not come out unscathed. Besides, so what if they killed these emperors and oracles? What about the armies? What about the people of those kingdoms? These people had no sense of belonging to Dayu, and the fact that they were brought to Panga continent proved that they were diehard loyalists of their kingdoms. If they were absorbed into Dayu, they would be like countless time bombs that would explode at any time. What if they killed them all? Yugu and the others quickly dismissed the idea. They could not do such a thing, for the consequences would be terrible, and it would really shake the foundation of Dayu. Besides, not only were there so many armies and oracles, there were also countless immortals flying back and forth, busy moving houses. If a war broke out and these immortals suddenly intervened, the consequences would be a real headache. After hesitating for a long time, Yugu and the others did not say anything. Suddenly, the red-faced man cried out, "If you want to fight, let's fight. If not, make way for our people and let them find a good, fertile land to build their homes. Why are you hesitating here? If you can't make the decision, let someone else do it." Just as the red-faced man was shouting, a bright light shone down from the sky, and another fragment of Panga continent, no larger than far heaven, slowly descended. Far away in the distance, the earth quaked and the mountains swayed, and the landmass fused with Panga continent. At the same time, more bright spots appeared in the sky. They were the remnants of the first batch of 300 outer heavenly realms approaching Panga continent at high speed. By the looks of it, it would only take a couple of days before the rest of the outer heavenly realms would also land on Panga continent. Cold sweat kept dripping from Yugu's forehead as he clenched his fists. Just as he was about to suggest that they should kill all these people in front of them, gather their people, and come up with other solutions, Wu Qi said leisurely, "As far as I know, the human race is able to survive and thrive on Pangu continent because they have Diyu, the unified dynasty, and Diyu, the human emperor. If you want to settle on Pangu continent, can you serve me, Diyu, as your master?" The eyes of Yu Gu and the other old oracles lit up, and they all echoed Wu Qi's words, raising the most straightforward question. The red-faced man frowned and said nothing. Next to him, a handsome middle-aged man with a pale face said with a faint smile, "The human emperor of Diyu is tyrannical, and the heavens have warned us to kill him. A decadent dynasty like Diyu should no longer exist in this world, and a new sacred emperor has been born, who will replace him as the master of the human race. The new sacred emperor may be me, or some other imperial brother. Don't you think it's ridiculous for you to use such an excuse to make things difficult for us?" "Interesting," Wu Qi said with a faint smile. "The founding of Diyu is something that Qi, the ancient saints, has promised, and it is also the decree of the Holy Mother of the human race, the Huahuang clan. The human race is the descendants of the Yan Emperor and the Yan Emperor, and the current human emperor is the lineal descendant of the Yellow Emperor and the Yan Emperor. All of you have said that the human emperor is tyrannical and wants to replace him. You make it sound so easy." "The heavenly Tao has warned us," said the red-faced man in a deep voice. "The current human emperor of Diyu is tyrannical, so," Wu Qi interrupted them and said, "don't say those words that will deceive the common people. Be generous and do it in the open. The heavenly Tao has warned us." "He, who can represent the heavenly Tao? You? Or those bastards behind you?" With a flick of his sleeve, Ao Buzan's true form waddled out from Wu Qi's sleeve. With a sway of his body, he grew to 10,000 miles long in an instant. He threw his head back and cried at the top of his voice, "The emperors of the 18 dynasties are licentious and tyrannical, and they have harmed the common people. The heavenly Tao has warned us, the human emperor of Diyu, to send angels to kill them. The imperial clans of the 18 dynasties are all bastards who have harmed the common people. The heavenly Tao wants them all dead." Ao Buzan revealed his true form, a 10,000 miles long black dragon, roaring with a loud voice. Then, he unleashed his enormous dragon pressure without any scruples. Instantly, the weather changed, and all the common people could only see Ao Buzan's enormous body hurriedly bowing and kowtowing to him. Ao Buzan roared even more excitedly. He changed some of the things he had done in the past and applied them to the 18 emperors, describing them as evil and tyrannical emperors who could not appease the common people without killing them. The red-faced man trembled with anger. He pointed his finger at Wu Qi and scolded him sternly, but how could their voices be of any use when facing Ao Buzan's tremendous roar? Princess Xianglu was amused. She chuckled and said, "Little K, it's your turn." She reached out and drew a line in the air. Then, little K, and her current partner, Feng Tianling, who was also a member of the Phoenix clan, turned into 2 fire phoenixes and flew out of the void. The 2 phoenixes danced in the air, chirping and repeating the unwarranted crimes of the emperors according to Ao Buzan's plan. Watching the dragons and phoenixes recount the crimes of the emperors, the common people turned pale. They dropped to their knees in bewilderment, not knowing how to react. Yu Gu and the other old oracles burst out laughing. Their eyes flickered with a bright gleam. For a moment, they were enlightened by Wu Qi's behavior. Didn't you keep countless descendants of divine beasts, including dragons, phoenixes, qilins, and so on, just to create prophecies and rumors? With such powerful resources at hand, who would be afraid of whom? Looking at the 18 emperors, Wu Qi said with a smile, "Look, the heavenly Tao has warned me that I'm going to kill you." The emperors retreated at the same time, and the oracles standing on the 7-storied pagodas came up to meet them. Large groups of soldiers and horses soared into the sky from the crowd of commoners, forming an orderly formation as they pressed forward. Wu Qi's eyes flickered. He wanted to kill them all here. He wanted to see how strong these invaders were. Looking at the oracles standing on the 7-storied pagodas and approaching him, Wu Qi finally made up his mind. He whispered a few words, and Princess Xianglu waved her right hand. Suddenly, a vast net of thunder emerged in the void, and countless thunderbolts smashed down toward the enemies. Chapter 864. When Princess Xianglu formed her avatar of the god of thunder, the thunderbolts between the heaven and the earth were like her arms, and she could control them as easily as breathing. With a single thought, the sky was filled with thunderbolts that came crashing down. Compared to those immortals who had to perform incantation gestures to borrow the natural energies to unleash such a powerful thunderbolt attack, the speed and power of Princess Zhongli's incantation were much stronger than those immortals of the same level. But this time, Princess Xianglu did not put too much effort into the thunderbolt attack. After all, they were in different realms. If Princess Xianglu killed all the oracles in front of her with one thunderbolt attack, it would inevitably attract the attention of some people. But now, Wu Qi was trying his best to avoid such attention. Therefore, although Princess Xianglu only put forth a little bit of effort, the power of the thunderbolt was about the same as the strongest attack unleashed by an oracle who had just stepped into the realm of oracles. Thousands of thunderbolts smashed down toward the oracles, who were calmly reciting incantations. The 7-storied pagodas beneath their feet were emitting an immortal glow and a faint chanting of Sanskrit. Behind them, there were also shadows of ghosts and deities that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Judging from the momentum alone, they were not much weaker than the oracles of Diyu. Amidst the auspicious glow, the over 1,000 7-storied pagodas suddenly grew to a height of over 10,000 feet, and the clouds and immortal glow they emitted merged into one in the sky. A few of the oldest oracles sneered and said, "Demon girl, what can a mere thunderbolt attack do to us?" Before their voices could fade away, the thunderbolt unleashed by Princess Xianglu had smashed onto the cloud of immortal glow. Along with a deafening explosion, the cloud of immortal light formed by over 1,000 pagodas was shattered into pieces by the explosion of dozens of thunderbolts. Over 100 7-storied pagodas, which bore the brunt of the explosion, exploded with a deafening boom. Broken pieces of bronze and iron flew all over the sky, smashing the heads of those oracles who were still calmly chanting spells and making hand incantation gestures. Dozens of oracles had their necks broken, falling to the ground and turning into meat pies before they could even let out a cry. Princess Xianglu, who launched the thunderous attack, was stunned. She had only prepared a thunder magic to harass the enemies first, and the main force of the battle should be Yu Gu and the other old oracles of Diyu. How was it possible that the lightning she had casually thrown out could injure these arrogant oracles who had high cultivation bases to this extent? Especially those 7-storied pagodas, which were obviously imitations of Diyu's supreme tower and were reinforced by immortal formations and restrictive spells of the Buddhist League. Logically speaking, the defensive power of these pagodas should be stronger than that of Diyu's supreme tower. But judging from the current situation, the defensive power of these 7-storied pagodas was not much better than that of ordinary heaven immortal artifacts. In a battle between supreme oracles, using defensive artifacts of this level was no different from courting death. Even the dozens of old oracles whose necks were broken by the broken fragments of the pagodas had died in a grievous way. They did not even have a life-saving artifact with them. They were all fragments of the pagodas that had been shattered by the thunderbolts, and there was no magical power in them, just pure physical impact. Yet, they could still kill dozens of people. What was this? Was this a joke? Princess Xianglu stared blankly at Wu Qi. Wu Qi rubbed his eyes and took a closer look at the oracles opposite him. Although their cultivation was generally weaker than that of Diyu's supreme oracles, they were still considered to have stepped into the Tongtian realm. Their magical power fluctuations could not be hidden from others. Why were so many of them killed by Princess Zhongli's thunderbolts as if they were tofu dregs? Thousands of thunderbolts were still falling. The old oracles, who had been so calm a moment ago as if they were the strongest under the heaven and did not take Wu Qi and the others seriously, were now like mice with their buttocks on fire. They screamed and fled in all directions, not even bothering to pay attention to their 7-storied pagodas. As the thunderbolts fell, the pagodas were blasted into smithereens one after another. The sky was filled with oddly shaped pieces of scrap metal. Some of those pieces were as small as fists, while some were as big as hills. Over 1,000 old men in black robes were flying around in a daze amidst the pieces of scrap metal that filled the sky. The scene was extremely miserable and desolate. Amidst the howling, the arms and legs of a few old oracles were broken by the flying scraps of iron and copper, pierced through their stomachs and chests, and broken their necks and shoulders. These old oracles fell from the sky while howling. They did not have time to cast magic to fly, and as a result, they fell to the ground and turned into meat paste. Some old oracles had large chunks of flesh cut off by the sharp iron shards. These old oracles were all hundreds of years old, and they were not as well maintained as the oracles of Deyu. These old oracles were all skin and bones, and they did not have 3 kilograms of flesh to begin with. But now, 7 to 8 kilograms of flesh had been cut off by the iron shards. The pain was so great that they screamed and howled. How could they still have the energy to fight against Wu Qi and his companions? Wu Qi blinked his eyes. What kind of people were these? It was true that their cultivation base was quite frightening, but as for their ability to fight, Wu Qi dared not compliment them at all. Standing next to Wu Qi, Princess Xianglu kept shaking her head. She was not interested in giving these people another round of thunder. The chaos lasted for a while. After more than 300 people were killed or wounded, the remaining 700 to 800 old oracles retreated tens of miles away, their bodies dripping with blood. They stepped on the dark clouds in a sorry state and looked over, pointing at the sky and howling furiously. Yu Gu, who stood off to the side with a dumbfounded expression, swallowed hard. With a wave of his hand, a black fragment of a pagoda, about the size of a human head, flew up from the ground and fell into his palm. A jet of black flame burst out of his palm and burned the pagoda fragment. A few sizzling noises were heard, and the huge fragment was burned to ashes, turning into a puff of green smoke that drifted away in the air. All that was left on his palm was a silver speck, about 1,000th the size of a sesame seed and smaller than the tip of a needle. Tisk! Yu Gu laughed mockingly. The supreme towers of Deyu's supreme oracles are made by collecting all kinds of rare materials and going through thousands of tempering. Just the innate and acquired essences of 5 elements in each supreme tower costs billions of kilograms. Hee, these fools. I'm afraid the acquired essences of 5 elements in each of their pagodas is less than half a kilogram. How can such inferior things be used on the battlefield? Upon hearing Yu Gu's words, the other supreme oracles of Deyu could not help but shake their heads and sneer, and the pressure in their hearts vanished instantly. The reason why supreme oracles could become the strategic force of Deyu was not only that they possessed mighty magic power and could use countless vicious killing curses, but more importantly, each of them had a supreme tower, which was filled with countless magical restrictive spells. When a mighty supreme oracle refined a supreme tower that was connected to his mind, it was like a war fortress. Take Wu Qi's Dark Yin Celestial Tower for example. When it was used for traveling, it was only tens of feet tall, but when it was fully transformed, it could turn into a huge pagoda tens of thousands of miles tall and tens of thousands of miles long. Coupled with the countless restrictive spells in the Supreme Tower, and the extremely strong materials used to build it, as long as over 1 million soldiers were stationed in it, it would become a metal fortress that would give the enemy a headache. No matter how hard the enemy attacked, it would be very difficult to conquer it. Each sky-reaching tower, even if it couldn't control the flow of time and was just the most ordinary sky-reaching tower, would require a huge amount of materials to forge. To forge all kinds of metals, it would take at least hundreds of mineral veins, and innate and acquired essences of 5 elements to inscribe formations in them. More elaborate supreme towers would need all kinds of innate spirit items, such as the pearls of 5 elements, to provide them with an enormous amount of energy. Each supreme tower required dozens or even hundreds of supreme oracles who were proficient in artifact refinement, and it took them a long time to forge. So, on the day it was forged, a supreme tower would have a defensive power that could match that of a primordial artifact. But, although the 7-storied pagodas of these oracles looked impressive, they were actually very shoddy. The quality of their pagodas was at most a mid-grade or upper-grade heaven immortal artifact. It was as if 2 equally strong men were fighting a duel 100 steps away from each other. One of them was holding a small toothpick in his hand, while the other was wearing a full set of armor and wielding various powerful long-range weapons. Such a duel was a complete one-sided slaughter. Wu Qi twitched his mouth and said with a sneer, if these oracles from outer heavenly realms are all at this level, you can fight against 1,000 of them. The group of old oracles all laughed in a relaxed manner. Yugu shook his head, then waved his hand and said with a smile, they are indeed weak. They. What are they doing? While Wu Qi and his companions were laughing mockingly, the hundreds of oracles who had survived the calamity had raised their hands at the same time and began to recite the same incantation. As they recited the incantation, numerous meteors the size of water tanks fell whistling down from the sky, dragging long tails of flames behind them. There were probably hundreds of thousands of them, and wave after wave of meteors came smashing down toward Wu Qi and his companions. Yugu burst out laughing. With a casual point of his finger, the supreme tower under his feet emitted a beam of dark light and soared into the sky, transforming into a giant tower that measured 100 miles in circumference, shielding them from above. The meteors summoned by hundreds of oracles slammed into Yugu's supreme tower in waves. Loud explosions rang out, and at the same time, countless mushroom clouds burst out from the supreme tower. But his supreme tower did not budge at all, and there was not even a scratch on its smooth surface. Yugu did not even activate the defensive mechanisms on the Supreme Tower, relying entirely on the solid material of the Supreme Tower to resist the attacks. Wave after wave of meteors smashed into pieces on the Supreme Tower. Countless gravel, sand, and sparks rained down from the sky, but none of them hurt even a hair on Wu Qi and his companions. It seems that they only know this one magic, said Princess Zhanglu suddenly. Wu Qi froze, Yugu froze, and the hundreds of Dayu's oracles froze at the same time. The reason why those immortals and Buddhas were so afraid of the oracles of the human race was that they had mastered too many cruel and vicious magic, all of which had the terrible power to kill people without leaving a trace. Every oracle of the human race had mastered at least hundreds of powerful magics. If it were those oracles who specialized in studying magics in the secret palace, each of them might have mastered thousands or even tens of thousands of magics with great lethality. It was the combination of complex, ever-changing, and vicious magic that gave the human supreme oracles the reputation of being untouchable. Yet, these oracles from outer heavenly realms only knew this one magic. Yugu pursed his lips and said through clenched teeth, I thought they were a pack of white tigers, but they are actually a pack of white cats. Brothers, let's slaughter them. The few old oracles laughed strangely at the same time. Waving their right hands, they unleashed plumes of black smoke, poisonous gas, phosphorescence, and chilly wind that wrapped in countless bizarre demons and fiends rushed out. Chapter 865. Dark clouds, ghost flames, and gust of wind filled the sky. A piercing cold air with an unpleasant smell, mixed with countless strange howls of ghosts and howls of wolves, pounced on the hundreds of oracles who were clenching their teeth and exerting all their strength. These oracles had squeezed out every last drop of magic power in their bodies, but all they knew was the technique of summoning meteors to bombard their enemies. As soon as the attack from Yugu and others arrived, the oracles were thrown into a panic. Some retreated, some flew up high, some scurried left and right, and some cried out, but none of them could resist the attack. The black smoke rushed into their ranks and knocked a dozen unlucky fellows flying away. As the smoke engulfed them, their skin began to sizzle and rot, and soon, large patches of flesh and skin began to rot down to their bones. Before long, pus and blood began to fall from the smoke, and at least 30 to 50 oracles were turned into pus by the smoke. The wisps were even scarier. Hundreds of oracles were accidentally caught by the wisps. The green flames swayed in the wind and burned their skin and flesh into a translucent green color. They screamed and flew around in all directions, but the inextinguishable flames on their bodies stuck to the bodies of others. As long as there was a tiny flame, it would quickly spread out in the wind. In just a few breaths of time, a large area of messy fire had spread out, and the last bit of oil in the bone marrow of these oracles had been completely burned away. Their bodies were burnt into charcoal and scattered all over the ground. As for the invisible and traceless gust of wind, it was even more terrible. The dozens of oracles only felt a gust of cold air blowing on their faces, and then it invaded their bodies through their orifices. The chilly wind was collected by great Yu's oracles from some extremely ferocious places of death in outer heavenly realms. It was formed by accumulating the energy of corpses of countless living beings. Even if one had the fleshly body of a gold immortal or a primordial immortal, if one was careless and was blown by it, one's flesh and bones would be reduced to ashes. The oracles who were hit by the gust of wind opened their mouths and coughed out plumes of ashes. Then, their skins, which were draped in huge black robes, fluttered and fell to the ground like kites with their strings cut. Not only did the chilly wind blow away their flesh and blood, but their souls were also blown away by the chilly wind. Not even a speck of dust was left. Amidst the dark clouds, ghostly flames, and gust of wind, there were also countless strange-looking ghosts and evil gods. They shuttled back and forth in the air, dragging long black tails of smoke behind them, while letting out shrill, unpleasant screams. These evil ghosts and deities were a little similar to the blood-draining celestial fiends that Wu Qi had refined. When they encountered an enemy, they would just pounce on the enemy, and if the enemy did not have enough countermeasures, their hot blood and energy essence would be completely devoured by these evil ghosts and deities in a few bites. Some of the ghosts and deities were the cruelest. They would even pull out the hearts of these priests and eat them like fruits. The sound of chewing was so loud that it could give people nightmares. It was just a spell cast by a few oracles of Diyu, but they had already beaten hundreds of oracles whose cultivation base was only slightly lower than theirs to the brink of collapse. In just a few breaths of time, over 300 oracles had died miserably. The other oracles screamed in terror and chased after the chariot of their emperors, who had not gone far away yet. Seeing how cruel the supreme oracles of Diyu were, the 18 emperors, who had been shouting that Diyu was the emperor of Diyu, and that they were going to overthrow Diyu, were scared out of their wits. They screamed hoarsely and urged their guards to whip the dragons that were pulling the chariot, fleeing into the distance in a panic. The oracles from 18 foreign realms had suffered a great defeat, and their emperors were fleeing in panic. The formation of their armies, which was quite orderly before, was now in a complete mess. Countless banners began to sway and shake, and some soldiers who were holding the banners kept retreating. As they retreated, the soldiers who followed the orders of their banners also fell into chaos. For a moment, a large group of people retreated at the same time, but none of the prestigious generals came out to organize the troops. As a result, the retreat of over 10 million soldiers from 18 countries turned into a great rout. Countless soldiers scattered all over the sky, threw away their helmets and armors, and fled in panic. Seeing that the army of 10 million had fled in less than 10 minutes, Wu Qi did not say a word. Princess Zhanglu raised her nose and snorted coldly, and Yu Gu and the other oracles looked at each other, then suddenly burst into laughter at the same time. These emperors and oracles had put too much mental pressure on Yu Gu and the others just now, which almost made them think that Diyu was about to be overthrown. But in the end, as soon as they made a move, they found that these people were just a bunch of paper tigers. Shaking his head, Yu Gu asked in surprise, "It's really weird. The cultivation base of those oracles is about the same as ours, so why are their spells so monotonous? They already have such a high cultivation base, but they only know a few spells." "Tsk, tisk." Wu Qi said faintly, "If we are really on the battlefield, think about it. If they avoid fighting you, but attack Diyu's soldiers with this kind of spell, what will the consequences be? No matter how strong Diyu is, it will still be dragged to death by them. As for this one trick they only know." Wu Qi looked up at the sky and thought, "Others kill the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness, but you've already added something to the donkey's feed before the millstone is put on it. Even if you don't want another human emperor's force that is strong enough to fight against the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League after taking Diyu into consideration, you don't have to make it so ugly, do you? These oracles who only know a single spell are really not a threat at all." After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi waved his hand and said, "People of the East Sea, attack. Kill all those who dare to resist, and capture the rest alive. Well, there are many people here, so it's better to bring them back and demote them as sinners or servants. The East Sea is vast, and I'm worried that there is no one to farm it." Diyu had retainers who served the same clan for generations, as well as servants and maidservants, but there were no slaves. Even the families of Dayu's subjects who had committed serious crimes would only be demoted as sinners and exiled at will, and would not deliberately humiliate or abuse them as slaves. But that was exactly what Wu Qi had in mind. Since he could not treat these people from outer heavenly realms as his own people, and he could not kill them all, he might as well take them back and order them around as slaves. There were too many places in the East Sea that needed manpower. Since these people were not Dayu's subjects, it was not a big deal to exploit a little of their labor, was it? The eyes of Yu Gu and the others lit up. They had also thought of the benefits. Without hesitation, they stamped the supreme towers under their feet. The doors opened with a rumble, and a large group of heavily armored warriors flew out of them. They were not like Wu Qi, who traveled around with an army of 1,000,000 soldiers, but there were tens of thousands of guards and servants in their supreme towers. Now that they were reminded by Wu Qi, they hurriedly summoned their guards to capture those people from outer heavenly realms. Yu Gu narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "Yu clan has quite a few mines that are in need of manpower to take care of. Well, as long as they serve Dayu wholeheartedly, we'll still remove their status as sinners after a few years, and let them live and work in peace and contentment." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and laughed. A few years later. That's a long time away, isn't it? Even if Dayu had all kinds of prohibitions to protect the interests of its people, these people from outer heavenly realms. Even if the human emperor knew that they were being mistreated, he would not stand up for them. As long as no one intervened in this matter, these people would not leave Yu clan's minds even if they died, right? Everyone's heart was as clear as a mirror. The group of old fellows looked at each other and smiled at each other. Then, they decided on this matter. The eyes of some old oracles who practiced evil magic flickered with fierce gleams, and they had some unpleasant thoughts in their minds. The human emperor would punish those who abducted Dayu's subjects for blood sacrifice. But, were these people from outer heavenly realms considered Dayu's subjects? To be or not to be? That was the question. Wu Qi could see through these old fellows' thoughts, and he nodded to himself. This was a good thing. Now that everyone had begun to abduct people from outer heavenly realms, the additional people of the 6 states in his East Sea would be less conspicuous. As long as he spent a few years brainwashing these people, they would become loyal subjects of the East Sea. When the future was in chaos, manpower would be a strategic resource. For now, the higher-ups of Dayu had not thought of this, but Wu Qi had long thought of it. Putting everything else aside, Wu Qi also wanted to form thousands of Buddhist kingdoms in his palms and collect a large number of devout believers to satisfy his craving. It was not easy to bring Dayu's subjects into his Buddhist kingdoms, but these people from outer heavenly realms, who had long been obsessed with the holy immortals and Buddhas, were the best candidates to enrich his Buddhist kingdoms. The army of 1,000,000 soldiers of the East Sea, together with Yu Gu and his personal guards, charged forward in a battle formation. Wherever they passed, no one resisted, and they killed countless soldiers of the 18 states as if they were cutting melons and vegetables. In less than a quarter of an hour, more than 10 million soldiers had knelt down and surrendered, and only a small number of elites, such as the Imperial Guards, were still fighting back. But, when a few supreme oracles joined the battle, those who dared to resist were killed in an instant. None of the 18 emperors managed to escape, and all of them became prisoners. When the people who were constantly migrating out of far heaven saw their emperors captured, and the oracles, who were like immortals who could fly, were beaten and fled, they were all stunned. Without hesitation, Wu Qi and the others produced their supreme towers and brought these people into the supreme towers. Plumes of gray smoke spewed out of the supreme towers, sucking in hundreds of millions of people wherever they passed. In just an hour, all the people of the 18 states who had come out of far heaven were captured. Then, Wu Qi and the others rushed to a heavenly realm in the distance that had just landed. Similar to far heaven, no one in this heavenly realm was a match for Wu Qi and the others. The oracles who flew out of this heavenly realm also knew only one magic, shooting out endless high-temperature fireballs. Although those fireballs were powerful enough to melt gold and iron, they were nothing in front of Wu Qi and the others. After another easy battle of defeat and annihilation, all the people who came out of this heavenly realm were captured as well. As more and more outer heavenly realms landed, Wu Qi and the others were busy plundering these people with great enthusiasm. Just as the people of the ninth heavenly realm were captured by Wu Qi and the others, Wu Qi suddenly sensed a faintly discernible divine will coming to him from the void. He paused for a moment, then immediately did something to adapt to the situation. Chapter 866. Without alerting anyone, a clone of a blood-draining celestial fiend replaced Wu Qi's real body. Wu Qi's real body split open the void and silently sneaked into it. Amidst the boundless void, Wu Qi's body transformed into a faint beam of starlight, blending into the starlight that blotted the sky as he moved forward slowly. Before long, he came to a flaming meteor hovering motionlessly in the void. This fiery meteor measured over 10 acres in size, and was entirely composed of the Triang violet rock, which had been tempered by the heavenly fire day and night. Raging flames rose hundreds of feet high from the meteor, but they could do nothing to the priest and the monk, who were standing calmly on the meteor. The priest was clad in a moon-white robe made of coarse cloth. At first glance, he looked like an ordinary middle-aged priest, except that he was a little taller, with thick arms and legs, and a rugged look. He seemed to be a priest who worked as a cook in some Taoist temple. But if one took a closer look, one would find that every single strand of his hair was glowing with a faint, moist green light, like the light of the full moon in the sky on the best night, clear and penetrating, bringing a sense of tranquility. The priest's skin looked dark, mottled, and ugly, as if it had never been washed clean. Only in the eyes of a profound cultivator like Wu Qi could one tell that every inch of this man's skin was glowing with a pearl-like light. This lustrous treasure light was contained but not penetrating. Clearly, it had already reached the point where the essence, energy, and spirit were completely unified without any leakage. The monk's attire was even simpler. He was barefooted and wore a monk's robe made of coarse linen. Half of his arm was exposed, and a string of ordinary white poplar beads hung around his neck. His height was ordinary, his appearance was ordinary, and his eyes were ordinary. He probably had the identity of a monk sweeping the floor in some remote temple in the mortal world. But, whether it was the priest or the monk, when they stood on the Triang violet rock, whose temperature was hot enough to melt iron, and let the Triang heavenly flame burn their bodies, not even a strand of their hair was touched, one could tell that they were not ordinary people. In particular, their graceful and solemn bearing made the emperors of the 18 dynasties who had just been captured by Wu Qi look like pheasants meeting phoenixes when compared to them. Looking down at Panga continent from above, they saw the army of the East Sea, together with the personal guards of Yugu and the other oracles, defeat and disperse a large army that had just landed in a heavenly realm. Hundreds of supreme towers were hovering in the sky, wantonly capturing the people in the heavenly realm, and the emperors of several dynasties had become prisoners of Yugu and the others. The oracles who drove the 7-storied towers were badly beaten and fled in panic, leaving hundreds of corpses behind. Suddenly, the monk laughed and said, "Lord Buddha said that if these oracles don't teach them a few tricks, how are they going to stand up to those ruthless figures of Dayu's army? Whether it is the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League, some of our fellow Taoists have suffered at their hands. What can these good-for-nothings do?" The Taoist snorted coldly and said in a flat tone, "Lord Buddha agreed with us that day. These oracles are nothing but fools who are sent to be slaughtered. We only hope that they can kill a few of Dayu's soldiers. Do we really expect them to accomplish anything?" The monk sighed, shaking his head and saying, "It's a pity that they have already killed one of their men. They were killed and captured alive just like that. How much manpower and material resources have the heavenly courts wasted all these years to train up such a group of ghosts? It's really pitiful and lamentable. For the sake of these vulnerable oracles, the Buddhist League has to give the Celestial Court countless spirit herbs every year." The Taoist narrowed his eyes at the monk and said with a cold snort, "Bald donkey, are you suspecting that we have embezzled the spirit herbs of the Buddhist League?" The monk put his palms together and sighed in a low voice, "Buddha is merciful. I'm not lying, but I do have my suspicions." The Taoist glared at the monk, then pointed at Panga continent and said with a cold grin, "I would be surprised if you say that the Celestial Court has embezzled the spirit herbs that were meant to be used on these oracles. After all, the 7-storied pagodas they carry with them are crafted by the Buddhist League. For these pagodas, the materials we, the Celestial Court, have given the Buddhist League are enough to craft enough supreme-grade gold immortal artifacts. Why are they using those shabby heaven immortal artifacts now? The monk gave the Taoist a look without batting an eyelid. Then, he put his palms together and chanted the Buddha's name, as if nothing had happened. The Taoist sneered and said, I suppose the Buddhist League has also embezzled the materials of the Celestial Court. Who is the person who crafted these pagodas? When I return, I'll report this to the great Celestial Emperor and ask him to issue a decree, asking the person who crafted these pagodas to come out and confront him. Where are the materials of the Celestial Court? If these pagodas were stronger, they wouldn't have been defeated with just one blow, would they? After a moment of silence, the monk sighed and said, Buddha is merciful. It is Prabhudaratna Buddha from the Buddhist League who crafted these pagodas. Unfortunately, he was besieged and killed when he broke into Liangzhu a few years ago to avenge his disciple. Not even a broken soul was left behind. The Taoist opened his mouth but did not say a word. The monk smacked his lips and said in a low voice, I'm curious as well. Who in the Celestial Court is responsible for crafting the spirit herbs that were meant to be used on these oracles? Although these good-for-nothings have barely reached the realm of supreme oracles, their foundation is weak, and they can only use less than 1/100th of their magic power. Clearly, the pills that are supposed to replenish their essence and strengthen their foundation have not been used on them. I'd like to find the fellow Taoist of the Celestial Court who is responsible for crafting these pills and have a good confession. The Taoist fell silent for a moment, then sighed and said, Dear Taoist, it's a pity that the one who is responsible for crafting these pills is immortal Ding Jun. It's a pity that he has been besieged by Dayu's army and killed in the myriad poisons formation. Therefore, you can't find him for a confession. Hiding on the Triang Purple Flame Rock, Wuqi could not help but roll his eyes as he listened to the monk and the Taoist's conversation. Could these almighty experts of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League be any more shameless? No wonder those oracles from outer heavenly realms were so weak. Not only did they have countless materials embezzled from their magical artifacts, there was also a big problem with their cultivation bases. No wonder Wuqi only felt that their magic power was fluctuating and unstable. Unlike Yugu and the other supreme oracles of Dayu, who had their magic power condensed and did not disperse, giving off a feeling of indestructibility like a clump of relic Jin Dan, the magic power of those foreign oracles was fluctuating and unstable, as if it would go out of control at any time. They were defeated before they could exert even 1 or 2% of their magic power. Wuqi could not believe that the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League could really do such a thing. Originally, each of them was supposed to be given a gold immortal artifact, but they had embezzled it into a mid-grade heaven immortal artifact. Perhaps the pills that were supposed to strengthen their foundation had been used by these almighty experts of the Celestial Court to feed their mounts. Wuqi had no doubt that these almighty experts would do such a thing, for he had seen too many of such things in his previous life. Moreover, the Celestial Court and the Tao League were really meticulous in their actions. Immortal Ding Jun, the pill refiner of the Celestial Court, who was also the sovereign of the Myriad Immortal Alliance, was killed by Wuqi and his companions. Prabhudaratna Buddha, the artifact refiner of the Buddhist League, was also killed by Wuqi and his companions. This was a masterful way to destroy the evidence and silence the witnesses. Not only that, their deaths would also serve to disgust Empress Hua and the others who were supporting the human race from behind the scenes. Using these excuses to shut Empress Hua and the others' mouths was truly a brilliant idea. The monk and the Taoist stared at each other for a while. Suddenly, Chi-Chi sneered. Immortal Ding Jun is not dead yet, the monk said with a cold snort. The Taoist smiled, nodded, and said, Buddha Ding Jun is not dead yet. Now that he is a Buddha of your Buddhist League, and has been taken as a disciple by Lord Buddha, Amitabha, he is already one of the 3,000 future Buddhas of your Buddhist League. TSK, what does what he did have to do with the Celestial Court? Even though the monk's mind and cultivation base had reached the level of Bodhi innate nirvana, he almost coughed up blood in anger at the Taoist's words. After staring at each other for a while, the monk sneered and said, The Celestial Court must hurry up, lest the people we send over end up as their clothes. Ha, You and I both know how cruel and merciless those supreme oracles are. If we are not careful, they will use these people as blood sacrifices. Ha, 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 they will be able to produce a large number of elite soldiers in a short period of time. When that time comes, will more of your celestial court die, or will more of my Buddhist League die? The Taoist smiled and said calmly, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. The first 300 heavenly realms are just stones to explore the way, and the best part is yet to come. No one dares not to serve the orders given by the few patriarchs seriously. Just wait and watch the show, fellow Taoist. The monk and the Taoist no longer spoke. The monk sat cross-legged on the flaming meteor, while the Taoist stared blankly with his hands tucked under his sleeves. Both of them stared blankly at Yu Gu and the others who were laughing evilly as they beat the immortals and mortals in various heavenly realms, making them flee with their hands over their heads. After a long time, the Taoist sighed and said, what happened here should have reached Liangzhu by now, right? Those supreme oracles in Liangzhu can't just watch these people take advantage of them. They have to come here and bring back as many people as they can. TSK, as many as they can. Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat. The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League were actually using the trick of luring the tiger away from the mountain. It seemed that they had even planned how you would deal with the common people in outer heavenly realms. After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi carefully studied the cultivation bases of the monk and the Taoist. Both of them were fifth-tier primordial experts. Whether in the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League, people with such cultivation bases were figures who held real power. It was no wonder that they could observe the movements on Pangu continent from here. It was very likely that they were the trusted subordinates of the great Celestial Emperor and Lord Buddha. Otherwise, they would not have been sent here. After a moment of careful calculation, he stealthily transformed his body into that of a Buddha. Suddenly, he cried out in a low voice, Senior brother, what are you waiting for? Act according to Master's decree now. This bastard was killed by Prince Deyu. With a sway of his body, Wu Qi's 36 feet tall avatar sprung up. Without giving the monk and the Taoist time to react, he grabbed the Taoist's head and legs, and exerted force with his golden arms. A miserable howl rang out as the Taoist's body was forcibly twisted in half by Wu Qi. Purple and gold blood sprayed all over the sky. How dare you, evildoer! Why you? The monk was trembling and could not say a word. The Buddhist power emanating from Wu Qi's body was extremely pure, 100 times purer and stronger than his own. A beam of blood-red light shot out of the Taoist's body as his immortal soul cursed angrily and fled in panic. Wu Qi gave a cold snort. A fist-sized natal relic flew whistling out of his forehead and smashed heavily onto the immortal soul. More than half of the immortal soul was shattered by the relic, leaving only a wisp of Yuanling. Then, he transformed into a beam of light and disappeared in a flash. Wu Qi grabbed the few magical treasures that had fallen off the Taoist's body, then nodded at the stunned monk and said, Senior brother, I'll leave this place to you. Please disguise this place as the scene of an assassination by the human race. I'll go kill that ox-nosed Yuanling, and then I'll return with you to return Master's decree. With a sway of his body, Wu Qi patted the dust off his buttocks and disappeared without a trace. There was a moment of silence on the distant meteor, and then a burst of earth-shattering curses suddenly broke out. Chapter 867. These states were basically the kind that controlled an entire planet. Some of them had tens of billions of people, while others had billions of people. Their armies were easily numbered in the tens of millions. As long as their higher-ups were completely destroyed, they could take over the rest of their armies and people. King Xian Shan and King Li Shan fell to their knees at the same time. There's a change in the Flying Bear army. King Xian Shan said in a deep voice. Today's night, today's moon, and today's King Xian Shan and King Li Shan were so strange that the eunuchs felt a chill run down their spines. It was as if they were lying on a coffin that had been around for years, and a few zombies were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, trying to drag them into the coffin. After a moment of silence, Emperor Haozuan's voice rang out, "Come in." After all, In the realm of Tao, the absolute suppression of heaven immortals and gold immortals would no longer exist. If the laws of the heavenly Tao they comprehended were mutually restraining, a primordial immortal would be able to completely dominate a grand heavenly immortal. That was why Wu Qi destroyed the Daoist's immortal body, destroyed his immortal soul, and left him with only one life. It took a lot of effort for him to control and use his power while Yuanling fled. Emperor Haozuan just threw his head back and laughed. Calmly, he clapped his hands and was about to activate Liangzhu's defensive formation. Once the formation was activated, he would be connected with the spirit cave in Yuxiong Plain, and his cultivation base would immediately rise to the peak level of Tao-breaking realm. By then, he would be fearless of any enemy. Those emperors and officials were bound to be killed, and using them as blood sacrifices was the best choice. But, with a little training and enough ordnance, it would be a good choice to use them as cannon fodder. On top of that, because the whole state was taken away, the wives and children of these soldiers were in the hands of Wu Qi and others, so there was no need to worry that they would not work hard. Princess Zhang pondered for a moment, then asked in a low voice, "Are those old fools really that powerful?" Wu Qi shrugged helplessly and said with a wry smile, "It's going to be lively, but I'm afraid that someone will target us. If that happens, we won't be able to enjoy the show anymore." Wu Qi's face twitched a few times. He was silent for a long time before he slowly nodded and said, "It's really amazing. Back then, their cultivation levels were already several times higher than mine. Chaos fiend gods like Ao Buzan were suppressed by them to the point of suffocation. It was also them who laid the foundation for Taoism and Buddhism today. Be it wisdom, methods, or cultivation, I wasn't their match back then. As for the current me, hee. Walking quickly up the peak formed by the primordial torch dragon, it took them a lot of time to reach the hall at the top of the peak. A row of heavily armed longbow men stood in their way. These tall, dark-skinned longbow men stared at King Xian Shan and King Li Shan with unfriendly eyes, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. If the two made the slightest movement, they would kill them without hesitation. However, the formation did not react at all. Looking at the palace, King Xian Shan said in a deep and powerful voice, "Father, Gu, have an urgent military report." Gu and Gmo, King Li Shan, were walking quickly in the imperial palace. But, as the sons of the human emperor, they did not have any real power. Unlike King Yang Shan, who was a king of the council, they had no fiefdoms, no private armies, and no independent income. They only had the title of king. At most, they had 2 or 3 royal gardens for them to enjoy, hundreds of guards to protect them, and every year, Emperor Haozuan gave them a sum of pocket money to reward them with some food and drinks for the singers and dancers. That was all. A bright light flashed in the White Lotus, and an ancient Buddha, all bronze in color, suddenly leaped out of the light and struck Emperor Haozuan's forehead with a Vajra scepter. A loud clang rang out as the scepter bounced back, forcing the ancient Buddha to take dozens of steps back. "What a hard head!" he cried out in alarm. A huge cloud bed was slowly sinking into the ground of the great hall. The brocade quilt on it was a mess, and faint bloodstains could be seen on it. Whenever a landmass fell from outer heavenly realms, Wu Qi and his companions would pounce on it like hungry wolves to share it. As the monk and the Taoist had said, after Wu Qi and his companions had divided the troops and people from the 70 or so outer heavenly realms, more and more supreme oracles had arrived from Liangzhu. The kings and clans of Deyu were tempted by these people who had fallen out of nowhere. These people, whom they had gotten for free, could be used as hard labor or as sacrifices. They were a great fortune. Without alerting anyone, Wu Qi returned to where he stood. His blood-draining celestial fiend clone merged with his true form, then rolled up his sleeves and breathed a sigh of relief. Princess Zhang glanced at Wu Qi, pursed her lips into a smile, and took out a handkerchief to wipe the sweat from his forehead. After all, he had killed a primordial immortal. Although his cultivation base was not as strong as Wu Qi's, it took a lot of effort to kill him with a single strike. After days of cooperation, Wu Qi, Yu Gu, and the others had gradually gotten used to the various steps of plundering people. Now, they did not swarm up and plunder people at random. Instead, each of them was assigned a country from outer heavenly realms, defeated their oracles, crushed their armies, captured their kings and all their officials, and then took away all the people of the country. Smacking his lips, Wu Qi said in a low voice, "We still have to be careful." King Xian Shan bowed his head and said with difficulty, "I didn't find out who was the one who betrayed me, but I accidentally found these things in the barracks." Smiling and nodding at Princess Xianglu, Wu Qi told her what had just happened in a low voice. Princess Xianglu gave him a sideways glance, then suddenly laughed and said, "If Zi Xian is the one who did it, I'll go back now and pretend to be a Taoist, then chop that bald donkey into pieces. Then, I'll leave one of his natal relics and run away. That will make things more lively." But this time, the human emperor had ordered Gao, King Wei Shan, to lead Yu Xiong army out of Liangzhu. Now, it was the newly formed Flying Bear army that was responsible for the safety of Liangzhu. The military minister and the military minister of the Flying Bear army were the brothers, King Xian Shan and King Li Shan. While Wu Qi and his companions were frantically slaughtering the 297th people who had landed on Pangu continent, the weather over Liangzhu was not good. Dark clouds obscured half of the full moon in the sky, and the reddish moon was shrouded in a misty mist. The moonlight sprinkled over the city with a hint of gloom, making the usually dignified and majestic city look no different from a mass grave today. Grinning coldly, Emperor Haozuan crushed the white lotus flower with one hand and said through gritted teeth, "Unfilial son, I knew this would happen. When I inherited the throne, the Grand Oracle of the Directorate of Celestials had said that I would die at the hands of my own son, and it has come true today." In Diyu, being the son of the human emperor was the saddest thing. 99% of their lifespan was not as long as their father's, and they had no hope of inheriting the throne. Their every move fell into the ears of the courtiers, and they could not violate the various rules and regulations passed down from the ancestors of Diyu, or they would be severely punished. They had to live like clay and wood carvings, and they had to live with relish. Led by a few eunuchs, King Xian Shan and King Li Shan walked quietly and quickly through the imperial palace. Their faces were solemn, and they were surrounded by an uneasy aura. The eunuchs were trembling slightly, and when the night wind blew past them, they trembled even more. Emperor Haozuan was stunned, and the armrests of the throne under his arms suddenly vanished. Gnashing his teeth, he cried out in a low voice, "There's a change in the Flying Bear army? Who is playing tricks in there? You, what did I tell you that day? How could there be a change in the Flying Bear army?" Glancing coldly at King Xian Shan and King Li Shan, Emperor Haozuan clapped his hands lightly. The few beautiful women bowed to him silently, then walked into the back hall at a leisurely pace as if they were walking on clouds. While Wu Qi and the others were busy annexing these humans from outer heavenly realms, something happened in Liangzhu. King Xian Shan and King Li Shan looked up at the same time. Their bodies had transformed into the golden bodies with 3 heads and 6 arms unique to the Buddhas of the Buddhist League. In that case, they cried out in unison, "Please surrender, Father. We don't want to bear the infamy of patricide." Emperor Haozuan bellowed. With a clench of his hand, the white lotus flew straight into his palm. A great sheet of starlight shot out of Emperor Haozuan's eyes and hit the white lotus flower, causing it to buzz loudly while a layer of misty light slowly poured out of it. King Li Shan, Ji Tao, and Ji Yu were born from the same mother. As for how many sons Ji Tao and Ji Tao had, perhaps neither of them could remember. In any case, he was Emperor Haozuan's son, and he was conferred the title of King Li Shan when he was born. Princess Xianglu narrowed her eyes, a little unconvinced. But she knew Wu Qi would not deliberately exaggerate, so she just gritted her teeth and vented all her unhappiness on the unlucky humans from outer heavenly realms. Very few people knew that Emperor Haozuan, who seemed to never step out of the Great Hall, actually spent every night in it having fun with the concubines in the harem. With his formidable cultivation base and vigorous energy base, he spent every day in the Great Hall doting on a few of his favorite concubines, and even enjoying the bodies of a few delicate girls. But, out of some strange habit, he rarely left this Great Hall, which was the core of Liangzhu's defense system. King Xian Shan and King Li Shan strode into the great hall, and the heavy door closed behind them, cutting off all the noise from inside and outside. Emperor Haozuan was sitting upright on the throne at the end of the hall. A few beautiful women in untidy clothes were carefully straightening his clothes, their pale red fingernails gently pinching the emperor's sleeves and straightening them. Emperor Haozuan cleared his throat and asked, "What important military intelligence?" Ji was Emperor Haozuan's 798th son, and the oldest of his surviving sons. Ji's elder brothers were born too early, and they did not live to see the day when Emperor Haozuan's lifespan came to an end, and they passed away early. Ji was the son of Emperor Haozuan and his favorite concubine a period ago, and he was conferred the title of King Xian Shan at birth. King Li Shan was carrying a green bundle on his back. King Xian Shan held out his hand, and King Li Shan hurriedly handed the bundle to him. King Xian Shan opened the bundle and revealed a white lotus the size of a rice bucket, which looked carved out of white jade and had petals inlaid with the 7 treasures of the Buddhist League. Emperor Haozuan gritted his teeth and said angrily, "It is indeed a magical artifact of the Buddhist League. What are those bald thieves trying to do? These days, the King of East Sea and Yugu have sent us military intelligence. Outer heavenly realms are constantly invading Panga continent. What are they trying to do?" Chapter 868. Emperor Haozuan was struck dumb. He had been living in this great hall for nearly 3 eons. Ever since he ascended the throne and was warned by Great Yu's grand oracle that he would be killed by his son's plot, he had never left this great hall. In fact, he had been living in it all the time. The Great Hall was the core of the entire defensive formation in Liangzhu, and the control center of the vast spirit cave in Yuxiong Plain. As long as Emperor Haozuan sat in it, with the mystic art of the human race, he could borrow the infinite energy of Yuxiong Plain, as well as the power of the heroic spirits of Great Yu's ancestors gathered in the formation, and elevate his cultivation base and magic power to the peak level of Tao-breaking realm. But today, when he activated the formation with a mystic art, there was no response. Not only that, but the endless power of the stars and the natural energy of the earth veins that poured down from the top of the Great Hall were disappearing rapidly as well. The enormous amount of star power and natural energy, which had been pouring into his body like a waterfall, had now turned into a weak stream of light the size of a fist. A few moments later, the last stream of light had vanished, and the Great Hall suddenly became dark. The faint light of a few dim candles in the corners of the Great Hall illuminated the vast hall. It was so dark that the figures of the group of people were hidden in the darkness like shadows of ghosts. Only the faint green light emanating from the bronze-colored Buddha had become the strongest source of light in the Great Hall. Illuminated by the green light, Emperor Haozuan's face turned pale green, making him look no different from an evil ghost. The suffocating silence was finally broken by Emperor Haozuan's voice. "What have you done, unfilial son?" King Xian Shan chuckled and said in a low voice, "Why do you say that, father? This formation is not something I can touch. Father, please shatter all the important acupoints in your body and disperse your Panga form. Otherwise, don't blame us for being cowardly and overreacting." King Li Shan slowly took a step forward. His golden body reflected a faint azure golden light under the green light, and the cold light added an air of death to the hall. He said in a low voice, "Father, please disperse your power. I will carefully provide for you. Whatever you can enjoy now, you will not lack in the future." Emperor Haozuan snorted coldly. His body flickered as he threw a punch at King Li Shan's face. The Buddha chuckled as he waved a strange-shaped Vajra staff, which was almost as tall as him, and easily blocked Emperor Haozuan's fist with it. Emperor Haozuan's blow, which was powerful enough to shatter the stars, was completely absorbed by the feather-light scepter. It was as if he had punched the void, and there were no more ripples. Not only was the force of his punch sucked away, but Emperor Haozuan staggered 3 steps forward because his punch had missed its target. The Buddha seized the opportunity and smashed the scepter 18 times at Emperor Haozuan in a row, each strike sending sparks flying in all directions and producing a deafening rumble that sounded like the ringing of a bell. All 18 strikes were executed with a mystic art of the Buddhist League, each of which contained the power of a dragon and an elephant, and each strike was 10 times heavier than the previous one. When it came to the last strike, the power was simply appalling. A crisp clang rang out as the scepter in the Buddha's hand broke into 3 pieces. The skinny Buddha grunted as the web between his thumb and forefinger split open, with purple and gold blood dripping down. Emperor Haozun cried out in pain as well. His clothes were torn to shreds, and a few small jade artifacts hanging around his waist were destroyed as well. There were a few visible lines of blood on his back. The palm-sized blood marks sank about an inch deep into Emperor Haozun's body, and the muscles underneath were all crushed to a pulp. With a sway of his body, Emperor Haozun transformed into a gust of wind and was about to flee to the back of the hall. But, as soon as he flew up, King Xian Shan and King Li Shan were already in front of him. A huge net made of unknown purple fibers and decorated with countless relics, pearls, and other rare treasures of the Buddhist League came crashing down toward Emperor Haozun. Emperor Haozun cried out in alarm as he was forcibly pulled out of the gust of wind by the net. Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough. As soon as the net stuck to his body, he immediately dodged a few steps to the side. That was how he managed to avoid being caught by the net. Unfilial sons. Emperor Haozun trembled with rage. He could tell that King Xian Shan and King Li Shan were not the reincarnations of Buddhas or Bodhisattvas. If they were, they would have been dug out and dealt with in the last great purge. With a mystic art of the Buddhist League, they had forcibly fused the golden bodies of the fallen Buddhas with themselves, and thus obtained nearly 70% of the overall strength of a Buddha out of thin air. Obviously, the golden bodies they fused with had a very high cultivation base when they were alive. Although they had only obtained 70% of the Buddhist power in the golden bodies, the aura they emanated was not weaker than Emperor Haozun's, whose cultivation base had reached the peak of the 9 stars realm in the 3rd Panga heaven. Although the Buddhist power came easily, and King Xian Shan and King Li Shan could not control it freely, it was enough to save their lives in front of Emperor Haozun. Moreover, with the help of those magical artifacts of the Buddhist League, they could even pose a great threat to Emperor Haozun. Just as Emperor Haozun was furiously scolding his sons, the Buddha had quietly come up to him. With both hands locked into a flame-shaped incantation gesture, he pressed it heavily against Emperor Haozun's back, leaving a trail of bronze flame in the wake of it. Emperor Haozun cried out in pain, and then a ripping sound rang out as the bronze flame left a dark green reverse swastika on his skin and flesh. The swastika glowed with an eerie light, and Emperor Haozun felt as if a hole had been opened in his body, through which his spirit, energy, and soul were pouring out. He spun angrily and pointed a finger at the retreating Buddha, then snapped, "This is the evil Buddha's seal. Are you the successor of the evil Buddha who was expelled by the Buddhist League?" Emperor Haozun pointed his finger out, and dozens of very fine wisps of black smoke shot out of his fingertips, each of which had a dark light spinning rapidly like a star in it. The wisps of smoke flew at an incredible speed and with a great momentum. They tore through the void like real stars, stirring up a suffocating wind in the great hall. The Buddha laughed in a low voice. "I'm Buddha Soul, the founding patriarch of the evil Buddha. How can you say I'm your successor?" Buddha Soul retreated quickly. With every step he took, a green lotus flower that looked like bronze poured out from under his feet. The lotus quickly expanded to tens of feet in size, causing the surrounding void to tremble. As soon as the wisps of black smoke touched the lotus, they slowed down as if they had fallen into a swamp. Emperor Haozun praised, "You are truly an evil Buddha. You have truly mastered the art of distorting the void of the Buddhist League." Emperor Haozun sighed. Suddenly, a slit opened between his brows, and a vertical eye gleaming with purple light emerged. Accompanied by a sonorous sword cry, a simple and unadorned golden longsword flew out. On one side of the blade were engraved the sun, moon, and stars, while on the other were engraved the mountains, rivers, and plants. On one side of the hilt were engraved the art of farming, and on the other side was engraved the strategy of unifying the world. As soon as the sword appeared, an oppressive imperial aura filled the great hall, and hundreds of green lotus flowers suddenly split in half. Buddha Soul cried out in pain. A bloody mark ran from his forehead to his crotch, and purple gold blood gushed out of it. In just the blink of an eye, the amount of blood that sprayed out of Buddha Soul's body was equivalent to the total amount of blood of dozens of normal adult men. King Xian Shan and King Li Shan, who had just pulled out two small sticks from their sleeves and were about to shoot at Empress Haozuan's chest, suddenly fell to their knees. Awed by the mighty imperial aura emanating from the sword, they could not help but kneel. The Xianyuan sword. King Xian Shan cried out. Emperor Haozuan held the sword in his hand and said coldly, "Yes, it is. If you want to kill me, it is far from enough to destroy Liangzhu's defensive formation." King Xian Shan and King Li Shan exchanged a panicked glance. Buddha Soul, who was severely wounded by the terrible sword intent of the Xianyuan sword, roared furiously and snapped, "What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?" Emperor Haozuan was startled. Without hesitation, he swung the sword over his shoulder, but the great hall was suddenly plunged into darkness, and there was no more light. A sound of flesh being pierced rang out. Emperor Haozuan growled in a low voice, and then there was a muffled thud of a body falling to the ground. The light in the great hall gradually returned, and the power of the stars and underground energy, which had been cut off, poured into the great hall once again like a waterfall, pouring onto Emperor Haozuan's huge throne. Emperor Haozuan, who had always been sitting on the throne, was now lying on the ground, with a large hole in his chest and all his internal organs crushed by someone. He was so dead that his bones were stiff. An old man with a white beard, standing about 10 feet tall, stood expressionlessly beside Emperor Haozuan's body. He was holding the Xianyuan sword, gently flicking its hilt with his fingers. He said calmly, "Buddha Soul, tell them that I, the old torch dragon, must not miss out on any of the benefits promised to me. I, the old torch dragon, want to be the #1 treasured flame of Buddhism, the revered King Torch Dragon, Tathagata Buddha, on equal footing with the Lord Buddha, one of the 2 future sect masters of Buddhism." Buddha Soul gave the old man a fearful look, then looked at the Xianyuan sword in his hand, which was perfectly fine. "Don't worry, Senior Torch Dragon," he said in a low voice. "We, the Buddhist League, are the most trustworthy people. Since we have promised you, we will not make any mistakes." After a brief pause, Buddha Soul pointed greedily at the sword and said, "As for this sword, the white-bearded old man, Torch Dragon, was the manifestation of the soul of the huge Mount Torch Dragon beneath the palace." He gently stroked the sword and said with a faint smile, "The sacred emperor has granted me the right to wield the sword in times of danger. Now that the human emperor is dead, this sword naturally belongs to me. In the future, when I become the Buddha League's greatest flame, Lord Torch Dragon, this sword will be my treasure of destiny. Do you have any objections?" Buddha Soul fell silent for a moment, then touched the 3-inch deep sword cut on his body and smiled gently. "Of course I have no objections." He took a deep breath and gave the sword a reluctant look, then said in a deep voice, "Please do it quickly, Your Highness. Where is the imperial edict I prepared? You should use the imperial seals as soon as possible." In a flurry, King Xian Shan pulled out a scroll of the human emperor's imperial edict from under his sleeve. Then, he found 3 imperial seals of different sizes from Emperor Haozuan's body and stamped them on the edict one by one. Vaguely, a line of words could be seen on the edict. "Therefore, following the will of heaven and the will of the people, I pass the throne to King Yang Shan, Ji Kuei." Chapter 869. They gave Baiqi a terrified look. When Baiqi unleashed his aura just now, they suddenly felt that the man in front of them was not a human, but a bloody demon king who had killed countless people. The aura of death and murderous aura that came rushing at their faces almost dispersed their souls. But, they had to fulfill their duty. Gritting their teeth, they mustered up their courage and stammered, "By the human emperor's decree, from today on, we are forbidden from entering Yuxiong Plain." Wu Qi shook his head in bewilderment. Since things had come to this, he might as well do it. No matter what the Celestial Court and Buddhist League were planning, he had to poke a big hole in their plan first. After all, he had Zhang Yi and Su Qin, the 2 quick-witted tongues that had been around for thousands of years. So, he was not afraid of anyone trying to reason with him. 2 dark silhouettes rose into the air. 2 oracles, who were wearing long robes of oracles with 3 golden suns embroidered on their sleeves, nervously looked at the fleet of flying ships that stretched for hundreds of miles in front of them. One of them shouted out harshly, "Who are you? Why are you trespassing into Yuxiong Plain with an army? Don't you know this is a capital offense?" Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and bowed his head, pondering. He recalled the conversation between a monk and a Taoist in the void a few days ago. The Taoist said that Yu would soon have no energy to stop the immortals and mortals from outer heavenly realms. It seemed to be true today. Emperor Haozuan had died suddenly, and his body had not been found. All he left behind was an imperial edict that was said to be hidden in a secret compartment. No matter how he looked at it, it smelled of a conspiracy. Apart from Ao Buzan, Lord Xiansheng, Catfish, Yuan Qing, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Gold Feather, Silver Feather, Feng, and Feng Tianling, and Lu Qingfeng, who had to oversee the administration of the East Sea, all the primordial experts under Wu Qi's command, including Luo Lu and the other members of the Lao clan, as well as 2 Xiaobai and other demon cultivators, had gone to Underhand sect. Waving his hand, Wu Qi gritted his teeth and shouted, "Attack! Attack with all your might!" Beaming with joy, Zhang Yi waved both of his hands, and a frightening innate magnetic force enveloped the military town. With a loud bang, a dazzling light burst out from the military town, and countless restrictive spells firmly protected it. However, the mountains around the town suddenly collapsed, sinking hundreds of miles into the ground, leaving the lonely town exposed in front of the army of the East Sea. Coupled with the batch of heavenly ghosts in his hands, as well as Hu Hai and Xiangyu, who were cultivating the Fiend League's grand technique, Wu Qi's trump cards were not only limited to the Taoist League and the Buddhist League. If the Tao sect won, he would be the Tao sect's Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal. The former soldiers under Baiqi's command were usually trained by Baiqi, so they were all infected with the same disease as Baiqi. Upon hearing the word attack, several 100,000 soldiers roared and started their flying ships, flying straight towards the military town. Baiqi gave a long and sonorous cry. His body was shrouded in a thick layer of blood-red light, and like a blood-red meteor, he smashed down towards the town. Wu Qi felt slightly relieved. The Underhand sect had sneaked into the Taoist League, and Beiji's branch had sneaked into the Buddhist League. Wu Qi himself was cultivating the cultivation technique of both Taoist and Buddhist League, and he had the scroll of stealing to deceive everyone. Thus, no one could see through his real background. Furthermore, he now held a high position in Diyu, and no matter how the situation changed, he would be able to adapt to the situation and make the choice that best suited to his own interests. But, after all, he was involved with Wu Qi in his previous life, and in this life, he was brought up by Wu Qi. Therefore, Beiji's loyalty to Wu Qi was impeccable. Before Wu Qi could give the order, the left and right armies of East Sea County, as well as the rear army, had already charged out. It was a pain of happiness. Wu Qi finally understood that it was not a good thing to have too many talents under his command. Furthermore, there were still too many people who had not gone out with the army, such as the emperors of the 6 dynasties who stayed behind to guard the East Sea County, and a large number of civil and military officials who had not been deployed. If they had gone out with the army, Wu Qi would not have known how to deal with them. Beiji did not ask any questions. He put his palms together and bowed to Wu Qi, then strode out. Wu Qi had given them a principle: primordial immortals were not allowed to show themselves. If the celestial court or other powers wanted to find out the truth about the Underhand sect, the disciples of Gold Immortal Realm would be the ones to do it. For the time being, it was not appropriate for the Underhand sect to keep a high profile, so they had to reveal themselves as a medium-sized sect. If Diyu won, he would be the meritorious Prince of Diyu. Upon hearing Wu Qi's question, the 2 messengers quickly bowed and said, "King of East Sea, it was Lord Lao Wang himself who asked us to send a warning to the King of East Sea." At the same time, he also asked the King of East Sea to lead the army back to Liangzhu as soon as possible. His Majesty has died a sudden death, and his body is nowhere to be found. All that was left was the imperial edict to pass the throne to Lord Lao Wang. Now, Liangzhu is in a mess. The newly formed Flying Bear army has split up, and all the great clans are in a state of panic. Rumors are spreading in the imperial court. Wu Qi sat alone in the command center. Looking at the generals and civil officials gathered in the cabin of the flying ship, he could not help but feel a little helpless. There were too many heroes under his command, and it was difficult for him to mediate the relationship between them. Just now, these people had been arguing for 2 whole hours because of the choice of the commanding officer and military advisor for the front, back, left, and right armies. Fortunately, the army Wu Qi brought here was more than enough for them, and he had promised each of them that they could lead an army on their own. Only then did they calm down. After being busy for a long time and arranging everything, Wu Qi was no longer in the mood to attack the invaders from outer heavenly realms. At his order, Lu Qingfeng was left to guard the East Sea, while Wu Qi led the soldiers from the 36 towns of the East Sea to break camp and march toward Liangzhu. They had to go back to Liangzhu. The more chaotic it was, the more benefits they could get. If King Yangshan could really ascend to the throne of the human emperor, it would be of great benefit to Wu Qi. But how did Emperor Haozuan die? Who could kill Emperor Haozuan without alerting the imperial guards? In front of them were 2 towering mountains. Between the 2 mountains was a military town whose city wall was less than 1.5 miles in width and 5 miles in height. The top of the city wall of the military town was crowded with people. Some large-scale ordnance, which was powerful enough to threaten airboats, was slowly being pushed out of the city wall. After pondering for a long time, Wu Qi summoned Beiji, the little disciple he had taken in years ago. As for Beiji, he did not deliberately cultivate him over the years. As a result, his cultivation base had just barely reached the realm of Arhat. Compared to the rapid progress of the others around him, Beiji's power and influence could be said to be extremely weak. After handing the scripture to Beiji, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Over the years, I've found you a group of young monks suitable for practicing the mystic arts of the Buddhism League. Bring them to the edge of the East Sea, find a good Taoist temple, and build a monastery to practice in seclusion. Just focus on practicing the mystic arts in this scripture, and I'll send someone to bring you whatever you need. Don't do anything unless I tell you to. When I need you, I hope you have at least a group of people you can use." A line of large, blood-red characters was written on the thin black stone. Weighing the heavy stone in his hand, Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and asked the messenger in front of him, "Did Lord Lao Wang personally order you to deliver the message?" The clothes of the 2 messengers were torn, and their bodies were covered with wounds, and they were bleeding profusely. They had just been given life-saving pills concocted by the East Sea, and the oracles of the East Sea personally trained by Princess Zhang Le to heal their wounds. Only then did they have the strength to stand. Under the leadership of Supremacy 3 Flame, Patriarch Jiang Yun, Immortal Qing Xian, and Ao Guang, the Dragon King of the East Sea, all the disciples of Underhand sect must find a blessed land at the edge of the East Sea and build their sect openly. By now, countless immortal sects from outer heavenly realms had invaded Pangu continent along with the fallen heavenly realms, and dozens of immortal sects of various sizes were building their cave abodes every day. Therefore, the addition of Underhand's sect would not attract any attention. The emperor has collapsed, and the situation is strange. Hurry to Liangzhu. Lead the army. Baiqi did not waste time talking to the 2 oracles. He drew the sword hanging at his waist and cut off their heads with one clean slash. The sword let out a dragon roar as Baiqi's eyes shone with a feverish blood-red light. Pointing at the fortress in front of them, he cried out, "Boys, attack!" Even though they were fighting fiercely and corpses were strewn all over the place, Wu Qi was just sitting on the fishing platform, waiting to reap the fruits of his labor. To be able to use the means of a so-called great thief to such an extent, he had already surpassed the level of a thief, and was almost at the level of a Dao. Zhang Yi nodded and cried out, "Kill, kill, kill! The human emperor is dead. Are they following the decree of a dead man today? Break through this fortress and head straight to Liangzhu. Kill the treacherous courtiers, purge the emperor's side, and uphold justice for me, Daqin, for Deyu." At Wu Qi's solemn request, Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others left in a hurry. 1,800 flying ships were divided into 5 armies, General Baiqi of the vanguard and Zhang Yi of the military advisor, General Lian Pu of the right army and Lin Xiangru of the military advisor, General Yu Yi of the left army and Su Qin of the military advisor, General Li Mu of the rear army, and 2 brothers, Sun Bin and Pang Wan, who were advising him. He waved his hand and signaled the 2 messengers to leave, then quickly gave out a series of orders. If the Buddhist League was victorious, he would be the ancient Buddha of the Buddhist League. Patting Beiji's shaved head, Wu Qi handed him a scroll of ancient Buddhist cultivation scripture which he had compiled himself. The mystic technique of the Buddhist League was not the one cultivated by Lord Buddha Amitabha or Buddha Phutu. If Beiji dared to cultivate it, he would be sensed by someone from the Buddhist League in less than 3 months, and at that time, endless troubles would come knocking on his door. The scripture which Wu Qi gave Beiji was obtained by Yuan Ling from an ancient Buddha in exchange for a spirit pill. The Zen scripture contained in it was very different from that of the current Buddhist League. In terms of subtlety, it was not as good as the current Buddhist League, but in terms of power, none of the current Buddhist League's divine abilities could compare to it. With the help of Princess Zhang Li's divine ability, the flying ships flew nearly 100 times faster than usual. In just half a day, the East Sea's army had arrived at the outermost outpost of Yuxiong Plain. Baiqi snorted coldly as he took a step forward and appeared in front of the 2 messengers. Without even looking at them, Baiqi said in a deep voice, "Something has happened in Liangzhu, and we've been ordered to reinforce it. Do you have any objections?" The army of 30 towns was hidden in Darkeen Celestial Tower, and only the army of 6 towns was accompanied by flying ships. 1,800 large flying ships whistled across the sky, casting a thick shadow on the ground like a dark cloud. There were 3,000 soldiers and 300 priests on each flying boat. The musicians in the army excitedly hammered the war drums and blew the horns, playing the array-breaking music passed down from the ancient battle of Zhuolu, slaying Qiyu. After witnessing the rapid cultivation speed of the human cultivation technique, Baiqi and the other war maniacs had been practicing the true body of heaven and earth scripture, which had been carefully modified by Wu Qi. Although the cultivation speed of the modified scripture was slightly slower than that of the original version, it allowed them to absorb the natural energy and refine their souls at the same time, so there was no limit to their natural lifespan. At the moment, Baiqi was surrounded by pure Panga's sacred energy. As he asked, the aura emanating from him was as sharp as a blade, scaring the 2 oracles into stepping back. Chapter 870. The 5-colored divine ray transformed into a huge hand that blotted out the sky and pressed down heavily on the military town, which was dozens of miles in circumference. Immediately, the crisp sound of countless crystal vases shattering rang out, and hundreds of restrictive spells, big and small, were shattered by the palm, causing all the generals and soldiers in the town to cough up blood and fall to the ground. Led by Baiqi, the soldiers of East Sea, whose eyes had turned bloodshot, could not stop in time. A large number of soldiers in the town had fallen, but they still raised their weapons and rained down arrows. Another large number of soldiers who were knocked unconscious by Princess Zhanglu fell to the ground. The soldiers of East Sea marched back and forth in the razed town, searching with neat steps. The corpses of the dead soldiers were placed neatly on one side, the wounded were imprisoned and sent to the flying ships at the back for treatment, and the soldiers who were in good condition but knocked unconscious by Princess Zhanglu just now were forced to drink the puppet powder concocted by the Directorate of Celestials of East Sea, and were forced to join the vanguard army led by Baiqi. Meanwhile, Zhang Yi and Su Qin, the 2 evil men who could shake the world with their tongues, followed closely behind these captured soldiers, telling them that the human emperor was framed and had died, and that the king of East Sea was rushing to Liangzhu to rescue the princes of the imperial clan. In order to enhance their persuasiveness, they produced an imperial edict and a secret edict from an unknown source. The people of Deyu were simple and honest, and their customs were traditional and closed. How could these soldiers ever think that a subject of Deyu would forge an imperial edict? As soon as Zhang Yi and Su Qin took out the imperial edict and the secret edict, all the soldiers in the town knelt down and surrendered willingly to the commander of East Sea. At the sight of this, Wu Qi could not help but sigh with emotion. There were also advantages to being ignorant. These soldiers of Deyu were too simple and honest, which had saved him a lot of trouble. Right when Wu Qi was sighing with emotion, a few of Bai Qi's grandsons dragged a few captains from the military towns, who had an unsightly expression on their faces, and brought them to Wu Qi. Large groups of East Sea soldiers guarded the surroundings, and in the air, there were also hundreds of priests with golden sun emblems embroidered on their sleeves. When these generals saw that the East Sea army was so well guarded, although they were cursing, they did not try to escape in vain. The few grandsons of Bai Qi pushed the few captains who held the highest position in this military town to the ground, forcing them to kneel before Wu Qi. These generals were covered in cuts and bruises, and some of them had their arms and legs chopped off. In the face of the East Sea's attack, the outermost line of defense in Yuxiong Plain was still too weak to resist the East Sea's attack. When he saw Wu Qi, a general, whose body was mostly intact but had a cut on his face, growled furiously, "King of East Sea, you forged the human emperor's edict. This is a crime punishable by the extermination of your entire family. You, as a foreign minister, how dare you lead an army to attack Yuxiong Plain? You are dead meat." Wu Qi looked at these generals with great interest and said with a smile, "Just now, someone told me that the human emperor gave you an edict today, ordering you to seal off Yuxiong Plain and forbid any foreign ministers from entering, right? But, as far as I know, the human emperor passed away a few days ago. Where did you get the edict?" The generals' faces flickered. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled. "You can do it, but I can't. Isn't it just forging an imperial edict? Damn it, Liangzhu is in a mess now. So what if I forged an imperial edict? When the big picture is settled, who will care about such a trivial matter?" Before the generals could say anything, Wu Qi's body swayed slightly, and a few blood-draining celestial fiends flew out and plunged into their bodies, devouring their blood essence and souls in a flash. The generals swayed a little, then slowly rose to their feet. Their bodies had been occupied by the blood-draining celestial fiends, and now they had completely become Wu Qi's clones. One of the generals strode out and snapped, "The secret edict in His Majesty's hand, King of East Sea, is real. The King of East Sea has ordered us to suppress the rebels, and we are willing to follow his lead." Just now, when they saw their commander suddenly jump out and confirm their words, the remaining 80,000 soldiers in this military town answered in unison, and obediently allowed the East Sea Commandery to reorganize them, make them part of Baiqi's frontline army, and listen to Baiqi's command. After looting all the war materials and instruments in this military town, the East Sea Commandery boarded flying ships, rose into the sky, and flew quickly toward Liangzhu. This was already the territory of Yuxiong Plain. In order to prevent immortals and itinerant cultivators from intruding into Yuxiong Plain, a large city was stationed every 10,000 miles, and a military town was stationed every 1,000 miles. Depending on the terrain, the military towns were garrisoned with 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers to 100,000 or 200,000 soldiers, while the large cities, which were responsible for controlling the situation within tens of thousands of miles, were garrisoned with at least 300,000 to 400,000 soldiers, and at most, nearly 1,000,000 soldiers. These soldiers were only the peripheral garrisons of Yuxiong Plain, and the strongest among them was only a middle-grade heaven immortal, which was far inferior to the original Yuxiong army. But, these soldiers were huge in number, and together with the strong walls and countless restrictive spells, the combat effectiveness they could exert was extremely astonishing. Unfortunately, they ran into the people of the 6 states under Wu Qi's rule. Not to mention the military prowess of Bai Qi and Li Mu, Zhang Yi, Su Qin, Li Si, Wei Liaozi, Lin Xiangru, and the others, could not be resisted by these simple and honest soldiers of Diyu. Along the way, the East Sea Commandery Army's deception, surprise attacks, and the help of Wu Qi and the other almighty experts, had possessed the bodies of Wu Qi's blood-draining celestial fiends, and all the soldiers had become the vanguard under Baiqi's command. The march of the East Sea Commandery Army to Liangzhu was like a hot knife through butter. There was basically no difficulty to speak of, except for Su Qin and Zhang Yi, who were busy forging the human emperor's imperial edicts. They had forged at least 100 strange imperial edicts and secret edicts along the way. Fortunately, they had the help of Li Si and the others, who were really good at this kind of shady business. On average, a military town would waste a quarter of an hour, and a large city would only delay the East Sea Commandery Army for an hour. With the meticulous calculation of the people of the 6 states, the East Sea Commandery Army swept through the eastern defense line of Yuxiong Plain, and in just a few days, broke straight into the outskirts of Liangzhu. In the void, 3 monks and 3 Taoists were standing on 2 flaming meteors, quietly overlooking everything that was happening in Yuxiong Plain. Unlike the monk and the Taoist Wu Qi saw the other day, who stood almost side by side, today, the 3 monks and 3 Taoists were at least tens of miles apart from each other. On top of that, the 3 Taoists were surrounded by flickering lights. Clearly, they had unleashed their defensive immortal artifacts, lest someone attacked them from the dark. The 3 monks and 3 Taoists all had a very strange expression on their faces as they watched the East Sea Commandery Army march straight in. When the East Sea Commandery Army had broken into the outskirts of Liangzhu, one of the monks murmured in a low voice, "How stupid are these DU soldiers?" Another Taoist glared at the monk and said with a cold grin, "They are indeed a little stupid. I wonder if fellow Taoist has a good plan to delay them." The 3 monks and 3 Taoists looked at each other, speechless for a long while. Then, they turned their eyes to the west of Yuxiong Plain at the same time, where Gao, the king of Wei Shan, was trudging toward Liangzhu with great difficulty. Along the way, the major cities and military towns had given him a lot of trouble. No matter how hard he racked his brains, the distance he had covered in a day and a night was not as good as the distance that Wu Qi had covered in an hour. By now, Wu Qi had reached the outskirts of Liangzhu, and Gao was still 10 days away from the city. Frowning, the 3 monks and 3 Taoists stared at the mighty army of the East Sea Commandery Army, then suddenly sighed heavily. "Why do you have such a freak?" Liangzhu was just 1,000,000 miles ahead of them. Standing on the deck of the flying ship, Wu Qi and his companions could already see the city wall. Now, Liangzhu was no longer as peaceful as it was when Wu Qi first saw it. It had a hint of laziness in its tranquility, and a unique charm in its antiquity. The aura in the sky above Liangzhu was in a mess. Various auras collided and rubbed against each other, causing the natural energy around the city to be in a mess. The walls of Liangzhu, which used to be more decorative than practical, were now hung with banners, but they were all crooked and out of shape. Wu Qi's ears twitched slightly, and he could still hear the occasional sound of bugles ringing out from Liangzhu 1,000,000 miles away. But, the sound of the bugles was also very messy, like the last struggle of a dying man. It was a bad sign. Looking at Liangzhu, Wu Qi murmured in a low voice, "Why does it look like the country is going to perish? Why is the aura of the emperor so messy?" Princess Xianglu narrowed her eyes. She glanced at Liangzhu with a 5-colored divine light and said straightforwardly, "It's hopeless. 90% of Liangzhu is covered by the aura of death, and over 90% of the people in the city are going to die. It's a bloody disaster, and they will die without a whole corpse. It's just a matter of who starts it first." Wu Qi opened his mouth but didn't say a word. Princess Xianglu cultivated herself in the primordial Tao of divinity, and as an ancient god, she had a much better understanding of fortune and fortune than any other powerful being. Since she could tell that 90% of Liangzhu was covered by the gray mist, and over 90% of the people in the city were going to die in a bloody disaster, it was basically a foregone conclusion. Gigu Zi, who was an expert in all kinds of yin and yang magic, glanced at Liangzhu and said with the same certainty, "Someone has messed up the fortune of this place with a powerful divine ability. How did the fortune that could have been passed down from generation to generation become like this? The one who messed up the fortune of this place is right in the center of Liangzhu." "The center of Liangzhu?" "It's in the Imperial Palace, on Mount Torch Dragon," said Wu Qi in a low voice. "That's the heart of Liangzhu and the entire Yuxiong Plain." Baiqi narrowed his eyes and looked ahead, his muscles rippling like water as he chuckled and said, "Chaos is chaos, death is death. That place is filled with a bloody aura, and a great war is coming. Boys, get your weapons ready." Unlike Wu Qi and the others, when the generals of the 6 dynasties saw the strong bloody aura above Liangzhu, they could no longer hold back their blood. As the flying ships of the East Sea approached Liangzhu at high speed, a sudden rumble came from the front. Amidst a cloud of dust, a troop of about 70 to 80,000 soldiers was fleeing in this direction like refugees. Behind the troop, an army of at least 500,000 soldiers was slowly approaching in neat phalanxes, with tens of thousands of elite cavalrymen chasing after them and killing all the fleeing soldiers. Among the fleeing troops in front of him, there were about 2,000 people clustered around a large flag. On the flag, the words Green Hill were written in large letters. The one fleeing was King Yang Shan's eldest son, Ji Dai, the king of Qingqiu. Chapter 871. General Baiqi gave a light cry, and all 360 flying ships in the vanguard halted at Qiqi's command. The airships of the middle, left, right, and rear armies also stopped in mid-air in a battle formation. Standing on the prow of the foremost ship, Baiqi rested his hand on the hilt of his sword and cried out, "Those who are fighting in the front, listen up. The army of East Sea is passing by. Make way now, or you'll be regarded as a provocation to the East Sea, and you'll be killed without mercy." Baiqi shouted loudly, causing the ground within a radius of 1,000 miles to rumble and a large amount of dust to rise into the air. The pursuing army stopped abruptly and quickly retreated into a defensive circle, while the fleeing army quickly approached. Under the banner of Green Hill, Ji Dai, sweating profusely and covered in blood, cried out, "I'm an old friend of the King of East Sea. Ask the King of East Sea to..." Before he could finish, Ji Dai's eyes rolled up and a few gurgling noises came from his throat. A stream of blood gushed out of his mouth, mixed with large blood clots. Obviously, the blood clots were blocking his throat, and he could not breathe well, his face turning purple and blue. Baiqi tightened his fingers on the hilt of his sword and narrowed his eyes with slight displeasure. Since he knew Wu Qi, that meant he could not kill him. In the past few days, Baiqi and his group of generals were like tigers that had just been let out of the cage. They fought to their heart's content. Even though Su Qin and Zhang Yi's group of civil officials had deceived and destroyed 90% of the resistance from the cities and military formations along the way, Baiqi's group still managed to take over a few military towns. After more than 2,000 years of loneliness on Myriad Immortals planet and several years of grievance on Pangu continent, Baiqi and the others' cultivation base had skyrocketed, and they had a mighty army under their command. It was time for them to fight and kill to their heart's content. Just now, they were about to slaughter both armies, but when they found out that Ji Dai was an old acquaintance of Wu Qi, they were too embarrassed to do it. Rubbing his nose, Baiqi couldn't help but have the mischievous thoughts of a child. "Oh, if I choke you up with a mouthful of blood, then I can do whatever I want with these tens of thousands of soldiers. Wouldn't that be great?" Tilting his head, Baiqi stared at Ji Dai, whose throat was blocked by blood. For a long while, he didn't say a word. He ordered a messenger to inform Wu Qi of the situation. Fortunately, Wu Qi's divine sense had covered most of Yuxiong Plain at all times. While Baiqi was still thinking about those bloody thoughts, Wu Qi had already flown past the vanguard and strode to Ji Dai's side. Grabbing Ji Dai's body, Wu Qi snapped at the few generals around him, "Are you all dead? Why don't you hurry up and save His Highness?" As he reprimanded the generals, Wu Qi slapped Ji Dai's back with his palm. A stream of Pangu's sacred energy blasted into Ji Dai's body, shattering the few clots in his throat. He opened his mouth and vomited violently. The blood he spat out was purple-black and stinking, and when it fell to the ground, it sizzled and corroded a hole the size of a human head. Clearly, Ji Dai was not only injured internally, but also poisoned. Taking out a life-saving pill concocted by the East Sea, Wu Qi stuffed it into Ji Dai's mouth, then quickly swept his finger across Ji Dai's back. An inch-deep mark was left on each of the 3 vital acupoints on Ji Dai's back. Judging from the pattern, it should be the lotus head of the Buddhist Vajra scepter. The aura in Ji Dai's body was a mess, and there was a sticky yin force lurking in his internal organs, almost killing all the vitality in them. He gently pressed his finger against the back of Ji Dai's head, causing him to howl in pain. Then, Wu Qi flicked his finger, and 3 tiny ghost heads emerged from the black smoke. They sucked at the back of Ji Dai's head, and then a chanting of Buddhist scriptures rang out. Wisps of Buddhist light poured out of the back of Ji Dai's head along with a warm mist that flowed like water. Tiny lotus flowers the size of soybeans could be seen spinning in the mist, each with the shadow of a golden bodhisattva sitting cross-legged on top of it. The ghost heads at Wu Qi's fingertips devoured all the Buddhist light, and only then did Ji Dai's face regain some color. He staggered to his feet, grabbed Wu Qi's arm, and snapped, "Go to Liangzhu now. It's urgent. Someone is trying to harm my father." Shaking the bowl-sized ball of Buddhist light on his fingertip, Wu Qi frowned and said, "There's no hurry. Are there Buddhists in Liangzhu?" A hint of resentment flashed across Ji Dai's face. He looked back at the army behind him and sneered, "I don't know if they are from the Buddhist League, but some of them used a Buddhist artifact, the Vajra exorcism pestle. I was hit in the head with a divine startling bell. Countless bald donkeys have been chanting curses in my head along the way, nearly driving my soul into samsara." Hee hee. As Ji Dai sneered, the defeated soldiers he led had arrived and gathered under his banner. They had exhausted all their strength, and as soon as they got close, they fell to the ground on their buttocks and could not move. But, as they all practiced the cultivation technique of the human race, even the wounded soldiers could only lie on the ground for a while to heal themselves with Panga's sacred energy. Before long, they rose to their feet in high spirits. The human warriors had a great strategic advantage on Panga continent, especially in Yuxiong Plain. Unless their heads were cut off, no serious injury could really hurt them. Even if they had broken arms, legs, or internal organs, they could quickly recover as long as they lay still for a period of time. The same was true for the army chasing after Ji Dai. It took them less than a quarter of an hour to reorganize their forces. When all the soldiers had recovered, 3 captains in purple armors rode slowly forward on a dragon, a roc, and a golden-eyed horned tiger. The captain in the middle, riding on a yellow dragon, raised his spear and pointed it coldly at Wu Qi. "King of East Sea, please hand over King Qingqiu. I'm Suiren Di, the military minister of the Right Flying Bear Army, and I've been ordered by Crown Prince to capture King Qingqiu." Wu Qi helped Ji Dai up, his fingers clasped on his back as he kept injecting Panga's sacred energy into his body. "Crown Prince? I've never heard of you having a Crown Prince. Who is this Crown Prince, General Suiren? What right does he have to order the capture of King Diyu?" Suiren Di frowned and said nothing. "His Majesty passed away 7 days ago. The soul medallion he left in the secret palace disintegrated, but no one saw his body," said Ji Dai with a sneer. "Only an eunuch took out the secret edict His Majesty left behind when he was alive, passing the throne to my father. He took a deep breath and spat out a mouthful of blood that still smelled strong, then said coldly, His Majesty's oldest prince is King Xian Shan, Jiyu. He refused to acknowledge His Majesty's secret edict, and instead proclaimed himself Crown Prince Diyu with the support of a group of bootlickers, preparing to ascend the throne by force. But my father and the other kings did not agree to it, so he privately mobilized his troops to capture me alive and force my father to do so." Wu Qi knitted his brows into a tight frown. What the hell was going on? Is that King Xian Shan a fool? Proclaiming himself crown prince and trying to ascend the throne by force? Aren't you intentionally ruining Great Yu by forcing yourself to ascend the throne without settling all these kings of the imperial clan? Especially when you forcibly mobilized your troops to attack the kings. It would be fine if you could capture or kill King Qingqiu alive, but why did you send Ji Dai here? Are you playing house? Ridiculous. Wu Qi commented on King Xian Shan's actions. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi asked, what has the special envoy of the Celestial Court, Lu Bang, done these days? Ji Dai's expression turned very strange. King Lu Bang, he said in a low voice, on behalf of the Celestial Court, he strongly urged Zhang Yu to act according to His Majesty's secret edict and let my father inherit the throne. While Wu Qi and Ji Dai were talking animatedly, Suiren Di was already roaring impatiently on the other side. When he saw that the East Sea army was formidable, Suiren Di had quickly shrunk his army into a defensive circle formation. But now, when he saw that the East Sea army was not moving, and Wu Qi and Ji Dai were just talking in low voices, he spread out his troops again, forming 9 cone-shaped formations that were easy to charge at the East Sea army. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi snapped, "Swear and D, I'm a king of Du conferred by His Majesty. How dare you attack me with your troops?" Swear-and-D pondered for a moment, then said with a sneer, "Even if you're a king conferred by His Majesty, trespassing on Yuxiong Plain is a capital offense, especially when you led an army into the border of Liangzhu without permission. Put down your weapons and surrender now, and perhaps I can spare you some of your crimes." Wu Qi was about to explain it to Swear-and-D. After all, they were already at the edge of Liangzhu, and there might be some important ministers of Liangzhu paying attention to the situation here. If he did something to Swear-and-D indiscriminately, it would be hard to explain when he arrived in Liangzhu. But, before Wu Qi could think of an excuse, Swear-and-D suddenly let out a miserable shriek. Before Wu Qi could see what was going on, 3 green Vajra scepters, each as thick as an adult man's arm, smashed into Swear-and-D's chest and came out of his back. The 3 scepters came from a place less than 10 feet in front of Swear-and-D, but Wu Qi did not sense the slightest movement of energy there. As the 3 scepters pierced through Swear-and-D's body, blood sprayed out in all directions. Swear-and-D screamed and retreated hastily. The King of East Sea and King Qing Qiu have colluded with the Buddhist League and murdered the ministers of Du. Their crimes are unforgivable. Kill them all. As Swear-and-D roared, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers behind him surged madly towards the East Sea army. The leading generals took out spirit talismans made of bones from their storage treasures, and were about to activate them to add all kinds of defensive spells to the soldiers behind them. Wu Qi's face darkened. They had made Wu Qi the scapegoat, leaving him no place to run. Wu Qi could not help but grin hideously. "Since you want to make me the scapegoat, I'll let you be unreasonable. Things have become a mess, and I can only tear a hole in it with violence. Hee, I'll kill you until your blood flows like a river and your corpses pile up into a mountain. Let's see how many benefits I can get from Liangzhu." Before the generals behind Swear-and-D could activate their spirit talismans, Wu Qi clasped his hands together and made a strange incantation gesture. Wisps of dark smoke wheeled quickly in his palms and quickly condensed into a ferocious ghost head. Wu Qi gave a thunderous roar and released the ghost head. A thunderous boom that sounded like a million thunderbolts exploded right next to everyone's ears. Blood spurted out from the 7 apertures of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers led by Swear-and-D. More than half of them fell to the ground without making a sound, and only a small half of them, who were stronger, managed to straighten their bodies and charge forward. However, the direction of their charge had become messy, and they had completely lost their way. Waving his hand forward, Wu Qi growled, "Kill them all. Leave no one alive." Along with a wild roar, Baiqi pulled out his sword and rushed out. Chapter 872. With their eyes bloodshot, Baiqi and the other generals were still a little slower, while Ao Buzan and Catfish Flood Dragon were faster. They had been cooped up in the flying ship for a long time without a chance to strike, and now that Wu Qi had given the order to kill all the enemies, they immediately rushed out with bright eyes. As soon as they rushed out, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Gold Feather, and Silver Feather all jumped out. Except for Lord Xiansheng, who was old and steady, and Little Kair and Feng Tianling, who did not like fighting, all the demons under Wu Qi's command rushed out. "Eat my spear, my grandsons. Stab them." Ao Buzan laughed maniacally complacently. In his hand, the soul-splitting spear had turned into a wild poisonous dragon that wreaked havoc. Countless shadows of the spear swept across the void, and those who were targeted by it would have their bodies riddled with at least 100 holes. Ao Buzan deliberately suppressed the power of the soul-splitting spear and used it as an ordinary spear. Otherwise, with the overall strength of these ordinary soldiers, they would have been turned into ashes by the spear. Catfish Flood Dragon, however, was too lazy to shout. She threw away the hammer, then used her tiny arms to grab those soldiers, throwing them into her mouth as if they were snacks. She did not even bother to chew, and just swallowed all the soldiers into her stomach. Yu's soldiers had achieved some success in cultivating the cultivation technique of the human race, so they were full of blood essence and had strong muscles. For Catfish Flood Dragon, they were the best food. The ferocious nature of the Gold Horn brothers and the Gold Feather sisters had also broken out. Their lower bodies were still in the appearance of young boys and girls, but their upper bodies had turned into the upper bodies of dragon pythons of fire and ice. They opened their mouths wide and began to bite and swallow the enemies around them. The poor soldiers had their souls almost dispersed by Wu Qi's soul-scaring spell, so they did not have the strength to fight back. Every time Jin Jiao and the others opened their mouths, they would swallow dozens or even hundreds of soldiers. A great deal of blood sprayed out of their mouths, and their shrill howls stretched from their mouths to their stomachs. As soon as these fierce beasts attacked, a storm of blood broke out on the battlefield. The ferocious scene of people being eaten as snacks made some of the soldiers of the East Sea tremble. However, the ferocious behavior of Catfish Flood Dragon and her companions had provoked these soldiers of East Sea to become even more ferocious. What else could they say when such ferocious men were their generals? Raise your weapons and kill. When Baiqi and the others saw that Ao Buzan and the others had taken the lead to attack, they were so angry that the blood vessels between their eyebrows were throbbing. They roared angrily and rushed out like mad tigers. Baiqi's killing intent was the strongest. He charged straight at Suiren Di and said, "Wu, do you dare to fight me fair and square?" Wielding his sword, Baiqi created a miles-long stream of sword energy that enveloped Suiren Di and his two generals. A dark shadow flashed across the void, and an iron staff, tens of miles long and 1,000 feet thick, fell whistling down from the sky and smashed heavily on the ground. The staff had killed nearly 10,000 soldiers with just one strike. Then, the huge thing rolled rapidly along the ground, heading straight towards Suiren Di and his companions. Baiqi's sword energy hacked on the iron staff and left a deep mark on it, but the strike, which was powerful enough to kill Suiren Di and his companions, was dissolved into nothingness. Baiqi stamped his feet in anger and roared, "How dare you, monkey demon!" Without saying a word, Yuan Qing darted past Baiqi, swung the iron staff 99 times in a row, and smashed Suiren Di and his companions, as well as the thousands of personal guards around them, into meat pies. While swinging the staff, he murmured, "Fool, when it's time to kill, just kill. Why do you talk so much nonsense?" Baiqi flew into a rage. He could do nothing to Yuan Qing, so he vented all his anger on the soldiers around him who had fallen to the ground. An intense blood-red light surged out from Baiqi's body. This was the blood-fiendish aura that he had accumulated over his entire life. Wherever the blood-red light covered, countless soldiers would die. Their blood essence would fly up and fuse with the blood-red light, becoming a part of Baiqi's strength. The brief slaughter lasted only a quarter of an hour, and then Suiren Di and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers he brought with him were turned into a puddle of blood. Wu Qi made a gesture to the back, and Princess Zhanglu began to recite a sacrificial spell. A beam of black light flashed across the void, and the bodies and souls of hundreds of thousands of soldiers were sucked into the void by an invisible force, vanishing without a trace. This was Yuxiong Plain, the outskirts of Liangzhu. Lei Meng, who had been summoned here by Princess Zhanglu with a spell, did not dare to manifest his clone here to accept the blood sacrifice. Instead, he secretly tore a rift in the void and swept away all the offerings like a thief. The sound of chewing could be heard coming from the void, followed by Lei Meng's praises of satisfaction. Then, the sounds quickly faded away. Ji Dai stared at Wu Qi as if he were looking at a ghost. "You sacrificed the blood of the ghosts and deities in Liangzhu," he cried. This. Wu Qi looked at Ji Dai expressionlessly and said coldly, "Is there anyone in Liangzhu who is in the mood to care about this now?" Ji Dai stared blankly at Wu Qi and said, "But, this. Wu Qi shook his head and said indifferently, "If Lord Lao Wang ascends to the throne, will he punish me for this? If Lord Lao Wang fails to ascend to the throne and is hunted down with a bounty on his head, what does it matter if I'm sacrificed or not? In any case, it's a crime of extermination." Ji Dai blinked and pondered for a long time before he understood. He looked at Wu Qi with an unsightly face and did not say a word for a long time. Wu Qi ignored Ji Dai's ever-changing expression. He just waved his hand and motioned all the soldiers to return to their flying ships. Then, he slightly reorganized the army. The 1,800 flying ships were no longer divided into front, back, left, right, and center. Instead, they formed a large square formation that was the size of Qi and flew toward Liangzhu. When the East Sea's flying ships were less than 100 miles away from Liangzhu, alarm bells rang out in the city, accompanied by shrill, unpleasant trumpets. Before long, a dozen dark supreme towers appeared in front of the East Sea's army. An old man with a pale face and no beard stood on one of them, pointing at them and shouting, "King of East Sea, withdraw your army and leave Yuxiong Plain." What do you want? Standing on the prow of the foremost flying ship, Wu Qi stared coldly at the dozen supreme oracles blocking his way without saying a word. Standing next to Wu Qi, Ji Dai snapped, "Who are you? How dare you stand in our way? Do you know who I am?" According to the human emperor's secret decree, King Yangshan was the legal heir to the throne. Therefore, as his eldest son, Ji Dai was undoubtedly the best candidate to be the crown prince. That was why he could righteously rebuke the people who stood in his way. The old man sneered and said proudly, "King Yangshan forged the human emperor's decree, and the crown prince has ordered him to be thrown into prison." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes. King Xianshan had ordered King Yangshan to be thrown into prison. It seemed that King Yangshan had failed in Liangzhu. No wonder Gao and Yuxiong army had not arrived yet. King Yangshan's private army in Liangzhu was not strong enough. Ji Dai also held a military position in the Flying Bear army, but he was also defeated and forced to flee in panic. Without the support of the army, even if King Yangshan had a profound cultivation base, he would have no choice but to surrender in Liangzhu. Seeing that Ji Dai was about to jump up and argue with the old man again, Wu Qi cried out coldly, "General Li Xian." Li Xian, who was standing next to Bai Qi, narrowed his eyes, grabbed his bow and took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, Li Xian shot out a dozen arrows, hitting each of the dozen oracles who tried to block his way with an arrow. All of the arrows were aimed at the space between their eyebrows. There was not the slightest deviation in the arrow's trajectory. The arrows used by Li Xian were forged by Wu Qi with the dark blue stone, a unique material found in the chaos. As its name suggested, this material could isolate natural energy and was almost immune to all spells. The arrows made of this material were completely black and did not reflect any light, so Wu Qi named them Black Streak. The dozen supreme oracles had no time to react when the arrows were shot. Unlike immortals, although they had strong magic power, most of their power came from the ghost god they worshipped. Compared to immortals, the speed at which human oracles cast their spells was slightly slower, especially the large-scale and powerful spells, which required a longer preparation time to cast. At this critical juncture, when they were attacked by Li Xian's divine arrows, it was the difference between life and death. With an ominous black light, the streak of black light gently sank into the foreheads of the oracles who stood in their way. Fragmented jade accessories exploded from the bodies of the priests. These were the protective artifacts they carried with them, but compared to the powerful artifacts of immortals, the supreme priest's protective artifacts were far too weak. The streak of black light pierced through the black smoke, black light, phosphorus fire, and chilly wind that suddenly appeared in front of their foreheads, piercing their skulls and coming out from the back of their heads. Li Xian opened his palm, and the streak of black light flew back into his hand. A dozen stiff bodies fell heavily from the sky. Princess Zhanglu flew up into the air. With a sweep of her five-colored divine light, she snatched all the supreme towers that had lost their owner's control and had lost all their spirituality. A burst of exclamations came from the void around Liangzhu, as the supreme oracles who were secretly watching the battle from all the aristocratic families in Deyu cried out in horror. Everyone knew that the oracles of Deyu took a long time to cast spells when facing the enemy. If they were fighting against immortals, the oracles of Deyu would be fully prepared. By fusing the power of ghosts and gods with themselves in advance, they would naturally have infinite power to adapt to the situation. But these oracles just stood in front of the army of East Sea and ordered Wu Qi and the others to retreat to the East Sea. They never dreamed that Wu Qi would give the order to kill them. When they did not cast spells to protect themselves, supreme oracles were no different from ordinary old men, and their bodies were even more fragile. Who gave Wu Qi the courage to kill more than a dozen supreme oracles? Those he killed were not ordinary mortals, but supreme oracles, the ultimate strategic force of Yu. Crazy. The king of East Sea must have gone crazy. Those people from the aristocratic families made up their minds about Wu Qi. But, before they could recover from the shocking scene of Wu Qi giving the order to kill a dozen supreme oracles, Wu Qi did something else that almost made them vomit blood. 108 Kunwu swords flew out of Wu Qi's body and hovered over Liangzhu with a ghastly green light. Kunwu swords. As important ministers and descendants of the aristocratic families of Yu, who would not recognize them? They were the divine weapons crafted by the sacred Emperor Xianyuan himself, the weapons used to kill Qiyu. In a sense, they represented the sacred Emperor Xianyuan, and a certain faith and symbol of the human race. Now, they flew out of Wu Qi's hand and transformed into the fiend-slaying sword formation, trapping the city of Liangzhu. I don't care if you are the crown prince or not, snapped Wu Qi, release King Yangshan, who has been secretly appointed by His Majesty. Otherwise, Liangzhu will be destroyed. There was a dead silence. No one answered Wu Qi. Everyone was so shocked that their minds went blank, including Ji Dai, who was standing next to Wu Qi. Are you crazy to threaten to destroy Liangzhu? Chapter 873. With Kunwu swords hovering high in the sky, no one in the vast city dared to move. As time went by, Wu Qi's face grew more and more unsightly. Gradually, a loud rumble rang out under the city, sounding like the crashing of a tidal wave. At first, there were only wisps of purple smoke rising from the ground and pouring into Kunwu swords. A quarter of an hour later, 108 streams of purple smoke rushed out of the ground and rushed into Kunwu swords with deafening rumbles. A blinding light burst out from the Kunwu sword. Everything in the world seemed to become translucent. The light penetrated a little bit and forced those members of the powerful families in Liangzhu, who were hiding in the void and watching the battle, to show themselves and close their eyes in embarrassment. With Liangzhu city as the center, enormous formation blueprints lit up one after another. Soon, these blueprints formed an enormous, solid formation, trapping Liangzhu city in the middle. Without Wu Qi's command, Kunwu swords naturally occupied the 108 most important nodes of the formation, constantly absorbing the enormous energy pouring out of the ground and injecting it into the formation, echoing with the growing power in the formation. The formation was the core defensive mechanism of Liangzhu. On the night Emperor Haozuan was assassinated, he could not activate it to protect himself or kill his enemies. But today, under the guidance of the Kunwu swords, it was suddenly activated, and it was bursting with a murderous aura. Compared to when Emperor Haozuan was controlling it, it was now emanating a terrible aura of destruction. It had something to do with the way the formation was controlled. Emperor Haozuan controlled the formation with the Xianyuan sword, which was the sword of the emperor and focused on awe in all directions with a mighty aura. Kunwu swords, on the other hand, were filled with an aura of slaughter, and the true face of the swords was a powerful killing intent. Therefore, the formation that was activated was also imbued with a fierce killing intent. When the whole formation was activated and the power accumulated in Kunwu swords had reached the point where it could not be used anymore, Wu Qi, whose face had turned purple from the enormous energy fed back to him, snapped, "Release King Yangshan now, or else." A beam of sword light flashed across the sky. The supreme sword power transformed into an azure dragon and descended, turning the east gate of Liangzhu into ashes along with a sky-shaking dragon roar. With Wu Qi's current level of cultivation, he could not control the formation, and he could not draw the enormous power from the formation into his body and turn it into his own. This required a secret art passed down from generation to generation in order to contain the terrifying power in the formation. When the formation accumulated power to a limit, Wu Qi could not control it anymore, so he could only let the formation pour out the excess power freely. The east gate of Liangzhu city became a sacrifice for Wu Qi to relieve his pressure. The tens of miles long section of the city wall, thickly covered in countless magic seals, vanished just like that. Since the founding of Liangzhu, not a single brick or tile had been damaged. But today, Wu Qi had finally broken the indestructible golden body. In the void, countless members of the Deyu clan and Chi-Chi sucked in a cold breath and glanced at each other in horror. Then, dozens of supreme towers tore open the void at the same time and rushed into the city. After nearly 10 minutes, King Yangshan, alone and looking a little haggard, slowly came to the east gate of Liangzhu, which had been turned into a huge pit. There was a hint of a smile in his eyes, and his face was expressionless as he cried out dryly, "What are you doing?" "Ah! You've broken the gate of Liangzhu. Have you become a coward? Open the formation and get in here." After a brief pause, King Yangshan snapped, "Do you know what a great crime you've committed? Do you know that Crown Prince was almost scared to death by you?" Although King Yangshan was scolding Wu Qi and Ji Dai, the smile in his tone was so obvious that even a fool could hear it. In particular, he emphasized the word, Crown Prince, and he even dragged out the words almost scared to death, one by one. There was no need to hide his gloating. King Yangshan was gloating over Wu Qi's misfortune. Kunwa's sword. Why did Sacred Emperor Xianyuan give it to Wu Qi? King Yangshan's internal organs were spinning with joy. Let's see what you guys can say now that Kunwa's sword is here. With his hands clasped behind his back proudly, Wu Qi nodded and cried out, "Leave the army outside. Set up camp at the 4 gates. King East Si and Ji Dai, come with me." Wu Qi cleared his throat. With a gesture of his hand, the Dark Yin celestial tower rose whistling into the air and opened its 4 gates. Out of the tower came columns of heavily armed and burly soldiers, mounted on all kinds of fierce beasts and large war machines, rushed out of the tower. At the command of Huang Liang and the other generals of the East Sea, nearly 1,000,000 soldiers from each of the 36 towns of the East Sea quickly set up camp outside the 4 gates of Liangzhu. It must be said that Wu Qi had done a good job in the East Sea over the past 2 years. With the endless natural energy and the energy he spared no expense to speed up time, the soldiers of the East Sea were not only numerous, but also had amazing cultivation bases. Most of the officers in the East Sea were in the realm of the 2nd Panga Heaven, while the weakest soldiers were at least in the realm of 7 stars or 8 stars of the 1st Panga Heaven. Hundreds of thousands of oracles rushed out of the Dark Yin celestial tower along with these soldiers. 30% of the sleeves of these oracles were embroidered with dazzling golden sun emblems, while the other 70% were embroidered with silver crescent moons. The hearts of the aristocratic families in Liangzhu sank when they saw all this. The overall strength of Wu Qi's men was simply too amazing. Although the East Sea seemed to lack some top combat forces, in terms of conventional military strength alone, the soldiers and oracles Wu Qi had shown so far were basically as strong as the entire military strength of a dozen of the oldest clans in Liangzhu. Some of the aristocratic families who had other thoughts could not help but curse in their minds. Under the nose of the human emperor, the aristocratic families in Liangzhu had to be very careful in recruiting a team of private guards, and they dared not to expand their military strength recklessly. But how could Wu Qi, a lucky fellow who had no foundation in Deyu, dare to recruit such a large army? Large groups of Donghai soldiers swaggered past outside Liangzhu. They deliberately stomped on the ground and smashed the iron poles like thunderbolts when they set up their tents. The noise shook the city and made dust rise into the air, and the faces of those from the aristocratic families nearby and far away turned extremely unsightly. Among the traditional and conservative nobles of Deyu, when had there ever been someone as arrogant and rude as Wu Qi? King Yangshan was all smiles, as if he did not notice the strange looks in those people's eyes. Leading Wu Qi and his company, he strode toward the imperial palace. Along the way, people could be seen hovering in midair above various mansions, quietly watching them. All the courtiers of Deyu knew that Wu Qi was King Yangshan's man. After all, Wu Qi had risen to power under Gao, the former king of Yangqiu. Now, Gao had replaced King Wei Shan and taken charge of Yu Xiong army, and Wu Qi had been conferred the title of King East Sea, training a new army in the East Sea at Emperor Haozuan's order. Today, It seemed that in less than 2 years, Wu Qi had made a big stir in the East Sea. How did he manage to train such a mighty army? And this was only the army under Wu Qi's command. Yu Xiong army, led by Gao, had not arrived yet. When Yu Xiong army arrived outside Liangzhu, what choice would they make? Amidst countless complicated gazes, Wu Qi and his company entered the imperial palace of Deyu, stepped onto Mount Torch Dragon, and walked into the already noisy great hall of the court. King Xian Shan, dressed in a black robe, was standing under Emperor Haozuan's throne, surrounded by a group of imperial kings and civil and military ministers, glaring at them. As soon as he saw Wu Qi enter the great hall, King Xian Shan immediately snapped, "Somebody, take down this arrogant traitor. Someone, remove the title of King East Sea and demote him to a commoner, and all the civil and military ministers of East Sea as sinners, exiling them to the northernmost land." What a bold act! King Yang Shan murmured in a low voice. "Since we've shed all pretense of cordiality, let's do whatever we want." With his hands clasped behind his back, King Yang Shan walked leisurely to another group of people in the great hall and stood still. This group of people was also dressed in the robes of kings, and most of the people behind them were clad in armors and military uniforms. Clearly, they were close to and supported King Yang Shan. In addition to King Xian Shan's group and King Yang Shan's group, there were several other groups of people standing in a disorderly manner in the great hall. Among them, there were people dressed in the robes of King Deyu. The number of people behind them varied, but judging from their manners and bearing, they were all representatives of the imperial clan or powerful clans in Liangzhu. At the sound of King Xian Shan's almost hysterical roar, a group of tall and burly longbow men came striding toward Wu Qi. Wu Qi sneered. He casually pulled out a Kunwu sword and thrust it into the ground. Amidst a loud clang, Wu Qi snapped, "Who dares to arrest me? Who dares to strip me of my title? King Xian Shan, right? You're just a self-proclaimed crown prince, not the human emperor of Deyu. What right do you have to strip me of my title and convict me?" When the longbow men saw the Kunwu sword in Wu Qi's hand, they looked as if they had seen a ghost. They hesitated for a moment, then stepped back with heavy steps. King Xian Shan flew into a rage. Just as he was about to reprimand Wu Qi, he heard Wu Qi cry out, "Just because of the military power in your hands? With just the Flying Bear army in your hands? Ha, if the one with the most military power and the bigger fist can decide who the human emperor belongs to, then why don't Wu Qi bring all the armies of the East Sea to Liangzhu and fight you to the death?" Rubbing his fingers, Wu Qi looked at King Xian Shan, whose face was unsightly, and said with a smile, "Or, you and I have a fair duel. If you die, the throne will have nothing to do with you. If I die, the armies of the East Sea will immediately withdraw from Yuxiong Plain and willingly serve you as the human emperor. What do you think?" The great hall was quiet, and no one spoke. Everyone was looking at King Xian Shan with flickering eyes. After a long silence, King Xian Shan stammered, "How dare you? You just attacked and killed outside the city." Once again, Wu Qi interrupted him and snapped, "Cut the crap. In front of all the officials of Deyu, I'm going to impeach King Xian Shan for being unfilial and disobedient." King Xian Shan almost jumped to his feet. "Nonsense! How am I unfilial and disobedient?" he shouted. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi pointed at King Xian Shan and roared, "Don't you have it? Where is His Majesty's corpse? Who killed His Majesty? As the oldest prince of His Majesty, instead of finding out the murderer and avenging His Majesty, you are obsessed with the throne of the human emperor. What is this if not unfilial and disobedient?" After cursing for a while, Wu Qi suddenly burst into tears and said, "Your Majesty, you have died such a tragic death. Not only did you not even have a corpse left, your princes only cared about fighting for the throne, and all the civil and military officials in the imperial court only cared about supporting the new emperor and fighting for power and profit. You have died such a worthless death." Hearing Wu Qi's cry, the people of the 6 dynasties and the other subjects of East Sea shuddered. But, when Wu Qi cried out, all the officials of Deyu were struck dumb. They looked at each other, and no one could say a word. Chapter 874. Above Pangu continent was the 33 heavens, the residence of the celestial court. Above the celestial court was the 9 heavens, the holy land where the primordial immortals of the Tao League lived in seclusion. On the other side was the great Vulture Mountain, the residence of the current Lord Buddha of the Buddhist League, Amitabha. 60% of the Buddhas of the Buddhist League usually lived in the various temples and cave abodes on the mountain, while the other 40% stayed in outer heavenly realms. Above the 9 heavens and the great Vulture Mountain, between the Pangu world and the chaotic world, in the rustling void, a vast expanse of purple mist that was shaped like a Ganoderma, measuring trillions of miles in circumference, held up a blessed land that was several times larger than an ordinary outer heavenly realm. It was filled with green mountains and clear waters, beautiful scenery, and countless exotic flowers and herbs, Ganoderma, and rare animals. It was a place that was millions of times better than any cave abode in the world. The natural energy here was not as vast as the vast ocean in Yuxiong Plain, but in terms of purity, it was not inferior to Yuxiong Plain. The spiritual qi here was warm and thick, bringing with it a sense of warmth. The pure yang qi contained a trace of pure yin qi that could penetrate one's heart and spleen. The yin and yang qi entangled with each other, deducing countless vitality. Under the nourishment of this unique yin and yang energy, even a piece of moss on this continent was plump and luscious, and even the fungus under a cluster of pine trees was plump and thick, full of energy. As for the birds and beasts, they had obtained countless benefits. The wild hares and squirrels running all over the land had the cultivation base of heaven immortals and above. It was just that on this continent, they were used to staying in their beast forms. At the center of the continent, at the foot of a tall mountain, in front of a deep azure lake, stood a simple, magnificent, and dignified wooden palace. The palace did not cover a large area, only about 1,000 acres in circumference. The palaces, pavilions, and even the rainbow bridge abode were all very exquisite. Every flower, every grass, every stone, and every tree between the houses had been carefully arranged. Clearly, it had taken a great deal of effort to arrange them. There was a white jade archway in front of the palace, on which the words Empress Wa Palace were engraved in ancient characters. The writing of these 3 words was simple and heavy, and it was surrounded by a thick aura of virtue. Even this memorial archway had a great amount of virtue attached to it, and it was already a rare treasure of virtue. 7 old men dressed in ordinary coarse monk robes sat cross-legged in front of the archway, facing the Empress Wa Palace with their backs to the lake. They sat there with their eyes closed, like wooden sculptures made of clay. Their breaths were concealed, as if they were dead men. They wore monk robes, but their hair was tied up in Taoist buns. There were hairpins carved from jade inserted into their buns. From left to right, there were 1 hairpin, 2 hairpins, all the way until there were 7 hairpins. An extraordinarily beautiful young girl, who was clad in a delicate cyan armor and holding a light cyan long spear that had gusts of wind coiling around it, stepped on 2 wheels that were condensed from gusts of wind. She angrily pointed at the 7 elderly men and yelled, "Old bald donkeys, why don't you get out of the way? I'm going to find some fresh fruits, can't I?" The 7 elderly men did not say a word, not even blinking their eyes, as if they did not hear the young girl's roar. The young girl was furious. She straightened the spear and thrust it at the face of the elderly man. As the long spear rose up, 3 thin black whirlwinds rose from the tip of the spear. With an ear-piercing whistle, the 3 whirlwinds pierced through the old man's eyebrows. The whirlwinds quickly compressed into 3 black shadows that were thousands of times thinner than a strand of hair. The black shadows tore through the void and produced a deafening whistling noise that made one's ears ache. In the outside world, even a newly formed primordial artifact would be torn to pieces by the spear. The 7 elderly men remained motionless. At the same time, a misty Buddhist light emanated from their bodies, which was as faint as flowing water. It seemed to exist, but at the same time, it was as if it was not there. It was as hazy as the faintest mist that enveloped their bodies. No matter how hard the young girl's spear tried to pierce them, the Buddhist light was as tough as the hide of an old cowhide that had lived for tens of thousands of years. Every time the tip of the spear sank into the Buddhist light, it would go no deeper than a grain of rice. In a flash, the young girl had stabbed the spear 3,000 times in a row, but the 7 elderly men were not hurt at all. Instead, the young girl's wrist became red and swollen from the backlash of the Buddhist light. Her slender and fair hands looked as ugly as braised pork trotters, and there seemed to be countless steel needles poking through her bones. The young girl's eyes turned red as she pointed at the 7 elderly men and bellowed, "7 old bald donkeys. You only know how to bully women." The elderly man in the middle slowly opened his eyes and patted his head with his hand. "I have hair, so I'm not bald." The young girl pointed at him and scolded, "All your disciples and grand-disciples are bald donkeys, so of course you are old bald donkeys." The old man in the middle closed his eyes, while the one on the far left slowly opened his eyes and said dryly, "Young lady, your parents gave birth to you, and you are a woman. Could it be that your parents are also women?" The young girl was at a loss for words. She stomped her feet angrily, then stepped on the 2 wheels of wind and returned to the Empress Wa Palace. Not long after, a beautiful girl wearing a long red dress and surrounded by raging flames walked out slowly with a flower basket in her hand. The young girl smiled and bowed deeply to the 7 elderly men, then said in a sweet voice, "7 old men, it's my pleasure to meet you." The 7 old men waved their sleeves at the same time, and a soft but tough force brought the young girl directly back to the Empress Wa Palace. The elderly man in the middle said in a low voice, "For the next 3 years, no one is allowed to enter the Empress Wa Palace, and no one is allowed to leave. This is something that even the Wahuang clan has agreed to. Why are you little demons making a fuss?" The girl in red was dragged back to Palace of Emperor Nhua's palace in a mess. She could not keep her balance and fell heavily on the square in front of the main gate of Palace of Emperor Nhua's palace, making her grimace in pain. A group of young girls dressed in all kinds of long dresses and armors hurriedly rushed forward and shouted at the same time. These young girls were like a flock of birds whose nest had been robbed. They kept chirping, but none of them could think of a way to deal with the 7 old men who were blocking the way. They were the 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist League, the 7 chaos fiend gods who founded the Buddhist League. Their disciples and grand-disciples had changed thousands of times, but they had always been cultivating in seclusion in the unbreakable mountain root temple in the void, secretly controlling all the major events of the Buddhist League. Each of them was an ancient great saint of the same generation as the Wahuang clan. Now that they had joined hands to block the main entrance of the Empress Wa Palace, not even the Wahuang clan could do anything to them. If a fight really broke out, how could the Wahuang clan defeat the 7 of them? The 7 patriarchs of the Buddhist League and the 9 Daozu of the Tao League were used to fighting together. No matter if the opponent was an army of thousands or alone, they would always attack in a swarm. However, chaos fiend gods rarely fought in groups. In the past, it was always the 7 or 9 of them who bullied the opponent. As a result, all the chaos fiend gods who fought against the Buddhist League and Tao League had fallen. There was not even one chaos fiend god left in the same generation as them. In the depths of the Empress Wa Palace, in a great hall surrounded by countless restrictive spells, the holy mother of the human race, the Wahuang clan, sat on a cloud bed. The purple chi of virtues around her transformed into a purple sun that shone with a blinding light. In the flickering purple light, a thick purple square cauldron was faintly visible. From time to time, a powerful spiritual power would surge out of the square cauldron. On both sides of the Wahuang clan, the Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan, and the Yen Emperor, Shenong, dressed in imperial robes, sat cross-legged on a cloud bed. Their heads were bowed, and a strong purple chi of virtues wheeled around them like hundreds of tiny flood dragons. The great hall was silent. After a long time, the square cauldron hovering over the Wahuang clan's head suddenly rumbled, and a beam of bright light swept out, placing a figure in the center of the hall. Emperor Haozuan slowly opened his eyes. His eyes shone like stars, his skin had turned silvery white, and his whole body seemed to be condensed from the pure power of the stars. Without saying a word, he kowtowed respectfully to the Wahuang clan 9 times, then to the Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan, and the Yen Emperor, Shenong. Shenong, the Yen Emperor, who had a kind and generous appearance and looked like an old man next door, slowly opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "You are a man who has died once." The curse of being killed by your own son has been lifted, but you still have to be careful. If it is not your son, it could be someone else. In short, as the human emperor, you have to be careful in these precarious times. Emperor Haozuan bowed respectfully and answered, I know. The Yellow Emperor, Xianyuan, snorted coldly and said, I'll break the void and send you back later. You know what to do. That evil dragon spared his life and forced him to serve De Yu for the rest of his life as a punishment. I didn't expect him to betray me again. When we get back, I'll kill him and extract his blood essence. It's enough to create a Tao-breaking expert. You can choose a good candidate and use the blood essence to help him. Emperor Haozuan bowed again, but he smiled bitterly and said, It's just that the Buddhist League is full of cunning tricks, and I don't know who I can trust now. Huang clan waved his hand, and a mirror of light appeared in the void, showing them everything that was happening in Liangzhu. They happened to see Wu Qi wiping out Sui Rendi's army without any scruples, bringing his army to Liangzhu in an arrogant and domineering manner, and even razing the city's east gate to nothingness with a sword strike. Seeing Wu Qi's behavior, Huang clan, Xianyuan, and Shinnong looked at each other, speechless. After a long time, Huang clan said in a low voice, This boy's behavior is not what a native of Deyu should do. But, his origin. Now that Buddha and Daozu have joined hands to disturb the heaven's secret, it's difficult to see his origin, said Xianyuan in a deep voice. But, I know his origin. He is a peasant who inadvertently comprehended the technique of absorbing Panga's sacred energy to temper his fleshly body. The true body of heaven and earth scripture he cultivates now was taught to him by blind old man and the others after they carefully examined his temperament. Huang clan pondered for a long time, then nodded slowly and said, Haozuan, you should go back to Liangzhu and act carefully. Since this boy is behaving like this, you can hide in his army and carefully identify the people in the city. Xianyuan nodded slowly as well. He rummaged in his sleeve for a while, then pulled out a sword identical to the one Emperor Haozuan had lost. He handed it to the emperor and said, That sword was taken away last time. This is the real one. You should use it well. Emperor Haozuan bowed respectfully and took the sword. Huang clan pointed a finger at the square cauldron over his head. A beam of light shot out, rolled up Emperor Haozuan, and quickly disappeared into the void. With a smile on his face, Huang clan glanced in the direction of the main gate of Empress Hua Palace and shook his head gently. The two sacred emperors shook their heads as well, then lowered their eyelids and fell silent.